Hello, everybody, and welcome to Up North Impersonal, where I speak with Canadian talent and hear their stories. And I don't know how we keep doing it here, but we have another very special guest, and I bet good money you've seen his work from something you've watched or played. Across his decades long career, he's dabbled in TV, films, video games, commercials, stuff at Nelvana, Disney, Pixar, and everything in between, and then some. So, obviously, it is an honor to get to speak with Mr. Scott Caple. Did I get your last name right?
Oh, just absolutely.
All right. I'm good at that. So far, like when I spoke with Steve Schneer, that was the first thing he said. It's like, hey, you got my last name right.
Yeah.
You get points. Oh,
Well, it's true because I mean it happens. Like
mm-hmm.
I've definitely that was part of my growing up years was, like you have to go and get something or other, the name was involved and there was always all kinds of mispronunciations or misspellings would occur or something like that.
I'm in the
Yeah.
same boat, honestly. Yeah. But don't worry. It happens. But let's see. To start, just the customary stuff. So, what were some of your earliest inspirations and what got you saying, I'm going to draw, I'm going to get my stuff out there and make my mark?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, probably let's see, I don't know. I just kind of swung towards art at a very early age. I mean, I began drawing like most kids do at a very early age. I mean, when you're 3 years old, it just seemed that, that's kind of the thing that I sort of, as I said, like, swung towards, as opposed to something like math or science or, something like this. Uh, but I would say it like really began to be a thing, in, late, let's say late public school, middle school, high school. Um, I began to, again, just, be aware of it more and more, and, things like, um, the stuff that you kind of look at in department stores even, or or well, let's see. I mean, like here's one thing. Like many young people in those days, I built a lot of models, scale models, like kit models, so on.
Yeah.
And I was into that fairly deeply. And of course, one of the things that was always fascinating was the art that would always be on the boxes of the things that the kits that were available. And of course, there were, certain artists that you become aware of. And, I would really look at those. And then, of course, yeah, as you also do, you tend to sketch from that stuff. Like once you get drawing, a lot of the training that you give yourself when you're on your own is just simply looking at stuff and then, copying from it, right?
Hmm.
And so yeah, that was one of the things. I mean, there were other things like I'm trying to think. As time progressed, I would say certainly by well, let's say again, late public school, things like Mad Magazine. I mean, I became very aware of, artists like Mort Drucker and Jack Davis and, all these guys now that, and of course, in those days, like people would go, who? You'd never like, the recognition of that, art world was pretty minimal, really.
Yeah.
But but on the other hand, I mean, I could go, as I said, I was just speaking about libraries and books because, I was saying like, books are obviously were a
Hmm.
huge part of my life. I was always in the libraries, the public library in town. This is the small town of Owen Sound, Ontario, which is where I'm at. I've actually returned to. That's where I am now.
Hmm.
But there was that. There was the school library. It was also very good. I remember the school library. They had like all those little books that were done by Searle, like Molesworth and St. Trinian's and so on. Talking about Ronald Searle, the English pen and ink artist.
Hmm.
Um, so I was artists like him and many others I was aware of from a very early time, and I would, you know, uh, take them home and draw from them. Comics to an extent. I mean, there was comics were around. I remember like buying them, but I don't remember being devoted to any in particular. Um,
Hmm.
but again, yeah, they were just, that was one of the things. So you're kind of like soaking in all the stuff. My grandfather actually was an artist. He was English.
Hmm.
He had never really worked as an artist, but he was a very devoted hobbyist. And he did a lot of watercolor work. He did a lot of portraits, did a lot of landscape painting. that kind of thing. And he had that kind of his stuff was always just that sort of English watercolor style, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could sort of uh, slot into like the 40s and 50s,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I can't think of another artist name in particular that would be like that, maybe, but anyhow. So I mean, like I was always you know, he would come to visit. And of course, if there was a family gathering or if we were out, go to the beach or go for a picnic, he'd always be out there with the watercolor box set up, this kind of thing. Just kind of like Winston Churchill, right? That kind of
Oh
thing.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I've inherited most of his art, so it's like I've got that all around as well. Um, so art, art, art. I mean, there was what other, where else did it come from? High school was a big thing because the the high school I went to uh, had a very good art course, which was in retrospect I realized was just absolutely singular. The
Mm-hmm.
fellow who ran it, he'd been doing it for he'd been there for some years already, and but he was the real deal. I mean, like he absolutely cared about real art. He was a practicing artist himself. Did a lot of landscape work and portraits and so forth and so on. But the art course in high school, it wasn't just, sticking popsicle sticks together and stuff like that, that kind of artsy craftsy stuff. Like
Yeah.
he actually gave us, real drawing and painting assignments and color theory and we got art history every, once a week. And I don't know if people remember the one of the things that had just come out at that time were those films called Civilization with Kenneth Clark. Does that ring a bell?
Not to me, no.
Well, there you go. Go look them up.
Oh, I
Anyway,
will.
they were a big deal at the time. They kind of hit it big. It was kind of like the art version of or that I should say the contemporary at that time version of something like I don't know who's somebody like some like uh David Attenborough, somebody like that,
Ah, okay.
kind of on those lines, yeah.
Interesting.
And of course, it was just in those days, it was to see a film in class, meant bringing in a projector, 16 millimeter, and then like this. Anyway, so I was quite taken with stuff like that. And again, I also kind of found a little bit of a predilection for the classics. I mean, I was and history, so I've always been interested in things like, early history, history from the earliest times, and as a result, the art, the architecture, you know, all those aspects of culture, which, like that, like National Geographic,
Yeah.
the family, like we always were getting magazines in, that was again a feature of the time. You had a
Mm-hmm.
subscription to magazines and they arrived and, you'd arrive home from school and then there'd be a National Geographic. So you'd open it and usually, there was always lots of good artwork in that. If not the photography, I mean, that was the other thing that you'd react to, eh?
Oh, of course.
So so there was
Yeah.
that, but the so yeah, there was that. So as a feature of all that, I mean, animation was in there because just because you saw it.
Yeah.
Like uh, the Warner Brothers cartoons, tended to be shown on television. Uh, like there was that late at Saturday afternoon slot, and you'd see you know, all the old cartoons there.
Of course.
And there was Disney, of course, was on television, and sometimes it would be some animation. Um, Occasionally, I did see them a lot, but I mean, all the features, would arrive in the local theater, because of the way that Disney did the re-releases of the major features, right?
Oh
About
yeah.
supposedly every 7 years. Um, and then there's things like the National Film Board. I became my, and by the way, if you want to stop me at any point
No,
to,
no, no.
you know, because I'm
This
just
is what
trying
this is
to
all about. I
kind of carry
want
on.
to. Yeah.
But getting into high school, yeah, like I mean, I was also I became employed by by the local library, and
Mm-hmm.
just at that time, this is like in the early 70s, and it just seemed like there was a lot of money for the arts going around, government funding and so on.
Yeah.
And one of the things they did was a major expansion of our local library. And part of that was they built a big multi-purpose room in the basement, and part of that had a projection booth at the back, and they installed these um, sort of higher end. They were 16 millimeter, but they were, they had arc lamps and so on. So they were able to throw, a beam quite a long ways. And they instituted some like, a lot of screenings. They started a film society, and I ended up projecting all that stuff.
Oh,
But
cool.
the other thing about it was that the way the libraries worked was there were films. There was all the 16 millimeter film, which would be in the collection, and some of it was, was in our library, but we were plugged into all the other libraries in the region, and so there were these films that were just going back and forth all the time. And as a result, you just saw a lot of stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
and a lot of it. I mean, the libraries at that point, like, where else did you go with an independent film?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, there were maybe some film competitions, but nothing like is happening today. And this is of course way prior to any digital technology.
Hmm.
So if you wanted to see a film, you had to pretty much it was a matter of you know getting like it would be on a reel, and the labs existed to provide all their services, and we let's see now. Well, I was just going to say that as a result, there was a lot of product in the libraries, and a lot of it was National Film Board stuff and Canadian filmmaking, like independent filmmakers. And this is
Yeah.
like live action, documentary, and animation. So that's where I got a real good introduction to like a lot of the stuff that was done by Norman McLaren and any of the other animators you can think of in,
Hmm.
between the 40s, 50s. Like when did McLaren begin doing his work? But this would be people like uh, 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 of course now I'm stuck for names.
That's okay.
Yeah, but there was a lot of work that I'm thinking of like that drawn on film stuff that he did. There was there was a lot of regular cell animation. People like Kai Pindle, Eunice McCauley. Let me think. I can remember the film was better than I can the names of the personnel who were there. But anyway, and it was yeah, it was a very rich time really because there was a lot of support for the arts then.
Hmm.
I mean, one of the things that I also did a lot of when I was in high school was things like get involved with school plays, yearbook. There was a local little theater. Uh, 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 Organization that I kind of got involved in backstage, but I would also do a lot of poster work for things. So and also I would end up silk screening the posters very much. This was
Hmm.
because again the art department that I was referring to had all this equipment, and so yeah, so that was a whole complete training ground. Like you really got to cut your teeth on things and try stuff out, in
Yeah.
terms of graphic design or technical things. I mean, I never actually did any lithography per se, but and this kind of follows into the college years as well. I kind of did a lot of the same stuff there as well. And
Hmm.
and again, yeah, college was a very rich experience at Sheridan. Suddenly it's life drawing, I'm going,
Oh,
and that
yeah.
was just I really glommed onto that because I hadn't really done any of that before. But
Yeah.
so yeah, and let's see. I'll just stop there for a moment and let you pick up the thread. Yeah.
That's okay. Like that's what I always want to do with this interview series. Just get people who may not have uh, talked about this stuff a lot of the time, and just turn them loose. Just let them talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
their
well,
experiences and just hear them out, hear their stories. But yeah, that was really good stuff there. But let's see. The other question I got is speaking of all your drawings and things like that, what stuff do you feel most at home getting to draw? And on the flip side, what is the stuff that makes you go, Oh boy, this again. Time to get serious.
Oh,
If there's anything
oh,
like
oh.
that.
Well, I was going to say just about anything. I enjoy drawing anything. Uh, I mean, uh, as I said, I've always been a little bit of what's the word for it? A nerd. Okay, let's
That's
just put it
okay. Me
that way.
too.
So I mean, things like I mentioned the model airplanes. So I mean, like I drew tons of that kind of stuff. I mean, I could tell you every little thing about an SC5 or a Fokker triplane or an albatross, this and that. I just had all that stuff nailed. I mean, as much as I could with the reference materials I had at the time, which again was, you know, something, but not a lot. I mean, it was years before I saw one of those aircraft for real. I mean, there's
Hmm.
certainly not in those years when I was, to see something like that. Didn't come until much later. So, obviously the learning, kind of only go to a certain point. But again, if you if you bought the magazines, right, like you'd go to the local, there was a couple of so-called bookstores, but they weren't really bookstores, more like stationery shops,
Yeah.
or the local just they were often called smoke shops.
Hmm.
They were the kind of places that would just yeah, they were like what sundry stores. But there'd be a magazine stand, and of course, and then there'd be the rack of comics, that turned around. And yeah, you'd pick up the latest issue of, Scale Modeler or, there were various aviation interest magazines. And of course, I would always like really, scope out things for the areas that I was interested in particular, which was more like, let's say World War One, World War Two,
Yeah. Yeah.
early aviation, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so on. Um, what was I going to, where was I going to go with that? Well, so airplanes, for example, and that
Yeah.
follows on, right? I mean, I had an interest in just about anything, you almost anything mechanical. I wouldn't say I was a mechanic. I mean, I've never been really an engineer of any kind. I mean, I didn't really get into building things like, small engines or anything like that.
Yeah.
But that was, again, that stuff was there was evidence of that in our house because, again, there was, my father was a cable repairman for Bell. We did a lot of boating, so there was like outboard engines. There was, and the things that you learn about, for example, let's say you take a boat out onto the water, you know, there are things that work and then things that don't work,
Oh, of course.
when you're handling a boat, at say a given speed or all that kind of stuff. I mean, like that's the kind of thing you get, that interested me.
Yeah.
And but yeah, as far as drawing things, oh, the human form, of course, the animal form, like a natural beauty. I've always been definitely keen on nature and the natural world. I mean, I
Same
certainly don't
here.
have any, like we all do. We all have to. But I mean, the small town I was growing up in, it was very easy to, get out into the countryside, on your bike and just take off or go hiking or the Bruce Trail, by the way. No, it goes right through Owen Sound. So, there was all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I mean, things like I was very interested in trying to portray. I mean, I was interested in, I wouldn't say I was successful at it, but to try and portray something like, seasons,
Yeah.
the natural world, that kind of thing, organic forms, all that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
sketchbooks. I mean, I'm constantly filling sketchbooks and all that. That's all full of.
Hmm.
I remember, so I had a bit of a turn came when I'd always been certainly interested in, well, as I said, literature, and particularly let's call it heroic literature. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
talking about the stories of Robin Hood and the Knights of the Round Table and the Three Musketeers and all that stuff. I mean, I loved all that. So of course I was always, like working on
Hmm.
uh like drawing things like that, doodling little characters that were, jumping around with, in armor and, swords and whatnot. But
Yeah.
and that grew. I mean, and as a result, like, you see a lot of the the movies on television, for example. The Errol Flynn films, the
Mm-hmm.
Swashbucklers, the sort of the classic movies which portrayed again those characters, and you get a certain idea of it, and then that carries you through to a certain point. And I just remember in college is when I started getting a little more interested in the real thing, so that's when I started, looking a lot more at real armor, real, you know,
Mm-hmm.
architecture, art, getting very interested in a lot of the authentic art, I'll call it, I guess, from
Yeah.
those time periods. And yeah, I mean, again, much of that was simply bolstered by things you'd see on TV, films you'd see, what you'd see in books and so on. I actually, oh well, now one of the things that went on in those days, a long time ago, which you might have heard about this, but there was there were all these. You'd have your March breaks, right? Your spring breaks,
Yeah.
and I'm not quite sure who organized them, but there would be these trips that you could take, if you could cough up the money for them. And
Mm-hmm.
I went on a couple of those. And I remember the first trip that I took abroad was to Salzburg in Austria. And
Ooh.
it was because our high school offered a German language program. And so it's
Yeah.
sort of attached to that, which I took. So
Oh,
I was quite
cool.
interested. I was quite interested in languages, fascinating. And anyway, so there was this trip which I went on. So it was a week, up there, and I mean, it just blew my mind. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, the landscapes for one thing, right? Because you're talking about the Alps
Yeah.
and all that. Yeah, pretty fantastic scenery, right? And then, of course, the architecture and the culture. It's you know, I remember we were taken to a few concerts, classical concerts, that were in, well, there's a thing called the Mozarteum, which is one of the big performance spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but I just things like, just, uh, you got your chance. Well, you had a chance to sort of spread your wings a little bit because, I mean, the supervision of the group was good, but I mean, at the same time, you would just take off. They would say, "Well, let's see, we do have this and this planned, but this afternoon, like you're on your own. Just take off, but be back by such and such." So you
Yeah.
just kind of like go off and explore a section of the city. And of course, I was sketching. I mean, there weren't great sketches, but because I was still developing my the technique, et cetera, et cetera. But
Mm-hmm.
just soaking all this stuff in was just amazing. Yeah, and I will say that combining that with, again, there tended to be this. I mean, it's like any young kid. I mean, a fascination with certainly the history of warfare. I mean, that comes into it. It just has to. I mean, like, I was first in line to watch like any movies, that came out like concerning that,
Yeah.
Battle of Britain or something like this. Um, Although a lot of that we would see on TV, but anyway, very aware, of, Second World War history and so on. So that again, is like being in that area in that geographical part of the world, kind of made you kind of suddenly realize more things. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
anyway, but just the idea of starting to travel, because there was a couple other trips that I went. There was a trip to Spain I took in high school as well,
That's cool.
and then anyway, I remember I took the first, really the first time anyone in my family had ever really done it, like a backpack trip, because I had this fascination with England in particular, and English history and so on.
Yeah.
So I basically saved up my shekels, over one particular year at school and made all these plans and then, headed over to, and I gave myself a backpack trip where I kind of just uh, didn't exactly hitchhike. I mean, it was more one of these things where you had a pass which allowed you to take the train just about anywhere. It was a
Yeah.
thing called a rail pass. It was a Brit Rail at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just went all over the place, saw tons of stuff. Just just completely blew my mind, seeing real castles, for the
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera,
That's
and
pretty neat.
yeah, yeah. And well, I was gonna mention in there, yeah, that was when I became aware. I mentioned like heroic literature. So then, of course, I stumbled across things like Lord of the Rings, right? This is back in
Right.
high school, so that's when I first read the books, and just, wow, yeah, this is amazing stuff. And yeah, so that was all in there too. But yeah, so I mean, again, I have a lot of stuff that I drew in those days, which is not very good, but which were imaginings of, characters and incidents from there. Uh,
Yeah.
I remember that was the time that the Hildebrandt brothers. Are you aware of
No.
the Hildebrandt brothers? Greg and Tim Hildebrandt. You should look them up because they were very active in those days and illustrators. And
Yeah.
what they did is they came out with this Tolkien calendar, a couple of them, two or three, I think, and which I didn't really like. I liked them, yes, but there was something a little bit, uh, there was something a little bit cartoony, which I didn't quite enjoy. But anyway, that doesn't matter. I mean, they were quite popular,
I'll look
and
them
yeah,
up
that
definitely.
again was just all part of the all the stuff that I was just like soaking up, in those days.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
so there's okay. So what was the other thing? And then, so you're saying like, what were the things I enjoyed drawing? Well, that gives you
Yeah,
a sense of all that because it was all that.
totally.
And the kind of stuff that maybe what was it? You said
Like the
maybe
things that
I
might
need to
make you a
double
little
down and like really
anxious, or
figure
it's
this
like,
out.
yeah, yeah.
Well, all the same things. That's what I'd say. Because then suddenly you'd run across something like, you know, um, how did this thing actually work? A steam engine. How does it actually work?
Yeah.
And I mean, or maybe, or even, human anatomy, animal anatomy. All, like really doubling down and trying to like get a handle on all that through again a lot of studying from books, and then all the stuff that was available to us at the school. There'd be skeletons, there'd be life drawing available. All the extra life drawing that they usually set up. I would often come out for that. And let's see. I mean, it wasn't supremely academic. I wouldn't say that. I mean, it was in the day of the kind of the a couple of the books that were really kind of in the ether in those days, where one was the Nicolaides approach to drawing,
Hmm.
and then the other thing was the drawing on the right side of the brain, or was it the left side of the brain? I've kind of forgotten which side was in the title of the book. But I mean, there was that. That was what was being presented a lot in school, and so it was a little bit more of a kind of, I wouldn't say do your own thing exactly, but you were encouraged to be a little more free form, perhaps, in some
Yeah.
of the drawing. Uh, Now, mind you, I mean, just because of my interests, I tended to like stuff that was a little more structured, and a little more academic. So I tended to draw that way, and I enjoyed, again, not the study of that, right?
Right.
But it wasn't something that. But on the other hand, I would say that I had some excellent instructors in those days, and nobody seemed to mind if I went that way. Although I will say that I remember okay, so I have to say one thing was that after school, or after high school, where everything was this big sort of stew pot of stuff, and I had
Hmm.
to kind of decide what to kind of was going to do, and I was very aware of animation. Oh, I should back up again. I'm sorry, I'm jumping back and forth so
That's
much.
okay.
But again, part of the exposure to animation in high school led to me getting I had went out and bought my own little Super 8 camera and then proceeded to do a lot of animation of my own. And
Hmm.
it wasn't so much drawn animation. I fell into doing all that stuff, like doing a lot of stop motion animation with whatever was around. I
Of
mean,
course.
you do it with your action figures and you did it with uh just anything,
Oh
things on
yeah.
the tabletop, it's that whole thing.
Yeah.
You take it, you move it, click, move it, click, move it, click, and then, you
I
know,
remember my brother
you
did
bring
some
life
with
to it.
like soda cans like years
Oh
ago.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
it was
that's
so
the
much
joy of
fun.
it.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of stuff you can do anything with. And of course, that was fueled by, again, seeing some of that work from the National Film Board and some other places, like again, McLaren, Neighbors. Uh, there's a few other films that he made where they were doing similar techniques. Um, There's one that I would recommend. It's called Opening Speech. That's it.
Opening speech?
Opening Speech by McLaren. Go watch that. It's really
Okay.
good. Okay. Sort
Will
of a
do.
combination of live action, but the way that they would like, you know, they would pose themselves, and move around a bit, and combined with stop motion of props and so on. Anyway,
That's cool.
I ended up doing a ton of that kind of thing myself, and
Hmm.
with friends, yeah. So that was so getting into filmmaking, and then when it came time to go to college, I was all ready to go to the animation program. And then just before, I had to pull the trigger, uh, for some reason, my mother and father ordered this book. It was a book on Norman Rockwell. There was a, this book that came out. This would be about 1973. It was a gigantic coffee table book. I mean, sure, I was aware of Rockwell already,
Yeah.
but the book just blew me away because I mean there was so much of his art in there, and it was all like really, really nice reproductions. And for some that plus, other stuff that I was doing, I said, I think I need to learn how to draw and probably maybe paint,
Hmm.
but draw better. So I ended up enrolling in the illustration program. And then I took 2 years of the illustration program at Sheridan.
Yeah.
And then at that point, for reasons, I decided to exit that program, and then I switched over to animation. So I went back and entered the animation program in its first year, and then took the 3 years. So I was actually at Sheridan for the 5 years, and
Hmm.
that's where I met Steve. Actually, was in the animation program down there. We actually attempted to do a few things together. We thought it would be great. The first one of the things I mean, Steve's a bit more of an operator than I am, eh? I mean,
Hmm.
he's always kind of got the radar going.
He's everywhere,
And it was
everywhere.
his idea he said, what Sheridan should have is a little tag, a little piece of animation that could get stuck on the beginning of the films that maybe say go into a competition or something like that. And we just went, I went, yeah, that's a great idea. So we did work on it, but we never completed it. So,
Hmm. That's okay. I didn't complete a couple of my college essays
oh
either
yeah,
for
yeah, that
animation.
was, I mean, I never, yeah. I was just going to ask, what's your background? Where, where,
Yeah.
where are you
So
located, etc.?
yeah, I'm out in the falls. I've been in like the Toronto area, Southern Ontario area my whole life, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
I've just been yeah. We got slammed with snow just the other day. I was
Oh yeah.
shoveling
Well,
this
we've had
morning.
the same. I spent the last 2 days just shoveling snow. Yeah.
I spent like the last 40 minutes this morning shoveling, and then my brother is like, "Hey, should we shovel?" It's like, "What do you mean?"
Yeah, that's right. I just shoveled. Come on. Yeah.
It's like, "No,
But
what
then
are you
if you've
talking about?"
so have you've been, you said, in Southern Ontario pretty much all your life?
Pretty much all my life,
Yeah.
and
So
yeah,
you know winter. You know what it's
I
like.
know what it's like. It's
Yeah.
it's really cold, and
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, this is winter. I mean, come on, it's the seasons.
yeah,
You get
but
out there, you go cross country skiing and stuff.
mm-hmm. If the snow was like the proper sort of like structure, I would really be. I'd be like, I really want to make like a snowman or a snow fort or something, just for the heck
Oh
of it.
yeah, this stuff that we've had. Yeah, it's not real snowman
No,
snow.
no, it's not snowman material. But when it comes to the other stuff that I've done, I've said that. Well, let's see, because I also have an art background. I might have alluded to it a little bit as well.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm
But
kind of imagined that that's kind of, where you were probably coming from
yeah,
to be
especially after like Steve told you about the stuff that I had done or things like that. But yeah,
hmm.
I've been drawing pretty much my whole life as well, performing in things like I'd like to do some professional
Oh
voice
yeah,
work
yeah.
and things like that.
Performing, that's another thing, yeah.
Yeah, and I went to Mohawk for animation, and I knew a
Ah,
couple of guys
okay.
that went to Sheridan. Like I'm just gonna throw out some names out there. Stop me if
Yeah,
you've heard
yeah.
one. Like Scott Glynn. Does that ring
Oh
a
yeah.
bell? Yeah, he was
Oh,
I
Scott was teaching there. That's right.
he
Well,
was
and that's Dave Carson was kind of in
Dave
charge of
Carson.
things.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
was
no, Dave's an old
also.
friend, and I
Oh,
I was aware that he
really?
had just retired out, and I know that the Mohawk is actually kind of gearing up a little bit more, I think.
Because I
I mean,
went there from like 2014 to 2016. I took a
yeah,
2 year
okay.
program, but yeah, I remember last hearing a couple, maybe more than a couple years ago that they were expanding into like a 3 year program or something. But That's why I went to Mohawk in the first place, because I was like, I can get in there, do my thing for 2 years, and then I can get out. But it was
Yeah.
a really cool experience, just getting to talk with like Dave and Scott and a couple of other guys,
Hmm.
and hearing their experiences and things like
Yep.
that.
Yeah.
That made the experience worth it for me, even though I had to like wake up at 5 in the morning to take 2 buses down to Hamilton. I was like,
Yeah,
you know
well,
what, it
but
was worth it.
that's that's what kind of builds a little character, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like you kind of have to do stuff like that. I mean, and of course, like my mom would say to you, "Oh, well, that was nothing," because when she was a girl, she was on a farm, and she had to go to school by walking 2 miles,
In
and
the
it's gonna be,
snow, blah blah
of
blah.
course, it's like, and I mean, and yeah, I mean, as a result, that was part of what made her,
Mm-hmm.
and these are things that make us, and it's all good. It's all, uh, you
Totally.
know, you can't what's the word for it? You can't dismiss it, or complain about it, or you can complain, but
Oh
at
yeah.
the same time you realize, oh no, this is all part of it.
Yeah, I brought it on myself. This is all part. Like again, I didn't have to do. I could have done like housing in Hamilton, or yeah,
Mm.
my mom was like, "Why didn't you just do that instead of traveling like 2 hours back to go for like a 1 hour class and then travel back?"
Oh,
It's
I
like,
see.
I just
Yeah,
wanted to
well,
do it.
that's a thought. Yeah, yeah, that was definitely part of life at Sheridan, because I mean, I was from here, so of course it would be a matter of finding places to, finding housing in Oakville, for the school year. And yeah, I mean, I never had the same place 2 years in a row,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
yeah.
personally, I just didn't want to do that. But yeah, if you see Dave or Scott, tell them I say hello, and
Well,
maybe they'll recall me.
I sent a Christmas card to Dave. I haven't really heard back from him, but yeah, I do like to keep up with people. I
Yeah.
think that's a very interesting part of my personality. I shouldn't say it like that. We all like to, but I mean, it's a facet of being human. I
Hmm.
mean, I uh, perhaps perhaps no, you can't keep up with everybody, but I mean, I've had a pretty good run. I mean, it has taken me in many places, and I've met a lot of people, and I've made a lot of friends, and I treasure those friendships. I really do.
Yeah.
And as a result, like part of that is like, yeah, kind of keeping up with people, and, uh,
Hmm.
keeping them in your mind. I mean, I'm convinced that's healthy for both, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So sure. I mean, in my case, well, should I just jump back into it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
We
mean,
can.
like you probably might have some specific places you want me to talk about, but I'll tell you, I'll quickly run down the list. I mean, so Sheridan, okay,
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
out of school, ended up going into and working for Nelvana,
Yeah.
right off the bat, right out of school. So that meant living in Toronto, and Nelvana was doing that feature at the time, the rock and roll feature.
Yes, I wrote a thing about rock and roll.
Yeah. So I ended up walked in, sat down, started doing layout, see, for that. And that was terrific. And I mean, right then I met people like, well, actually, a number of the people who had been in school just prior to me, people like Charlie Bonifacio and Chuck Gammage and
Chuck
Larry
Gammage. Yeah.
Jacobs and, oh my
Larry
gosh, there's
Jacobs.
everybody, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, 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 okay, I'll just, and let's see, layout. There was myself. There was Ray Jaffalis was in charge of layout. There was Dave. I never see. This is where I do a brain fart on names a lot now. Um, Dave, you'd know him. Yeah, he was in school with me.
Yeah.
Uh, and then there was Jim Craig. There was oh boy, Don. Forgotten Don's last name. Um, There was Frank Reyes. I don't suppose you know that name.
Not yet. No.
He was local to Toronto. I mean, I'm not sure where Frank is now, but young Filipino fellow who's
Hmm.
like worked on some pretty good stuff, and
Hmm.
he was very good. I mean, he was they kind of used him as a character designer, really, because like he could just knock out these great characters. But it's again very disciplined across the board. Good perspective. Paul Ravoche became a very good friend. I met him at that time.
Mm-hmm.
He was designing, okay,
Yeah.
and let's see. Well, anyway, so rock and roll, and then I'm at rock and roll for about 6 months or so,
Yeah.
and it's like a bullpen, right? Everybody's got desks in the one room, and there's like one phone on the wall over there, and the phone rings, and then we're working away. It's Scott, telephone. Oh, okay. I go, and it is one of the instructors from Sheridan, who tells me that. And actually, the long story is that one of the other instructors had left Sheridan and gone back into the business, and he had been hired at Lucasfilm. So at this
Ah.
point, I didn't know, of course, all the details, but they were looking
Mm-hmm.
they're looking for somebody to help in a project that they're working on. So the long story short was that yes, I ended up going for an interview, flew down. It was Lucasfilm. It was ILM, of course, the facility, and they were gearing up for Raiders of the Lost Ark, and which of course nobody really knew about at the time. We
Of
all knew about
course.
Star Wars, of course. I mean, Star
Mm-hmm.
Wars was just like, of course, the biggest thing in the world at that point. Um, so yeah, that was kind of interesting. Anyway, I accepted the job. That meant I ended up in California for a couple of years working for ILM, and that was like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Dragon Slayer. Do you remember that? Remember
Uh,
that one with Peter Mackin, what's his last name? Uh,
that one escapes me. No, not familiar with that one.
Ralph Richardson was in it. It was the old wizard. And the big thing was the dragon. The dragon was a stop motion dragon. Phil Tippett. Yeah, it was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, then there was Star Trek II, okay, Wrath of Khan, then
Oh, cool.
Poltergeist, and a little bit on ET. Like they did the first two of the one year and all three at the same time the next year.
Yeah.
They were working on all those at the same time. So anyway, yeah. So of course, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be all part of that, and definitely ended up kind of rediscovering my sort of like latent techno geek, yeah,
Uh-huh.
self. Because of course the thing down there was, the effects at that time were of course very well, not yeah, hands-on. I mean, it was still
Yeah.
build a set, build a little model. It would be either shot with motion control or stop motioned or God knows what,
Yeah.
and optical printing. Uh, all these techniques, and my job was essentially animation slash roto. That's what they call this, the
Yeah.
animation roto department. So the a lot of what they had done were things like, laser blasts, phaser beams, that kind of thing. There would be, you know, they'd enhance a lot of stuff, explosions and so forth, TIE fighters hitting asteroids, and that would
Right.
be, yeah, it would be a combination of what they call stage elements, things that are shot on the stage, mounted on a stick, with the motion control camera, working
Mm-hmm.
against it, right? I'm sure you're aware of all that. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
you'd have that, plus, the model, plus some pyro, plus it would all get matted together, and anim would be in there probably somewhere. But,
Yeah.
well, the legend has it that one of the animators, John Van Vliet, by the way, uh, animated. That's kind of a famous moment. It's the chase through the asteroid field. One of the TIE fighters hits an asteroid. There's an explosion, and if you look very closely, you see this little figure kind of spiraling off into space. And like, the animator John, he kind of put this little. He's supposed to be the pilot, basically. You see. Anyway, so these are the sorts of things you do to kind of like make the day, go by better. But
Yeah.
anyway,
To not go
uh,
stir crazy.
Anyway, suffice to say that I ended up on Raiders and contributing to, a lot of the effects in there. And it was at first like some of the lightning bolts that are just seen, in the natural, let's say, some of the matte shots, and then of course all the stuff that comes out of the arc at the end of the movie.
Oh, that's
It
so
was
cool.
again a combination of stuff. But there's two or three shots I can point to, and I can go, oh yeah, I animated that. Kind of thing.
Cool.
So of course that's followed me forever. I mean that because
Of
of course the
course.
movie went so big and it's just it contributed to an entire like subculture of movie fandom, et cetera, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, yeah, I'll take it. It was kind of fun to do that, But it was fun because it was a little bit basic, It wasn't
Yeah,
like they would. I I hope they'll never do it, but I could see them going back and replacing all the effects with digital stuff, right?
like they
Like
did with
they've
Star Wars.
done in then Star Wars, to what end? Yeah,
Hmm.
like was it? I don't think it was successful
No.
because there's something about getting a guy on a costume on some kind of big rig live out there, and then you just kind of like wheel it past the camera and you know go
Yeah.
with it, and it looks better.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Nolan is finding this out. I mean, there's a
Hmm.
whole conversation there, right?
Oh,
Christopher
of
Nolan
course.
and his philosophy towards filmmaking, and he likes a lot of these so-called practical effects. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and but then here we are. Like digital effects are definitely here to stay, and and there is some amazing stuff being done. But I'm not in that world anymore. Not really. Um,
Uh-huh.
I'm interested in the movies, but I couldn't tell you how half of that stuff is done. I mean, that again, just as a general comment, I've sort of kind of gotten away from my timeline, but I've found that over the years, again, I'm still very much a traditionalist, and I kind of prefer traditional art. I mean, even though in a lot of the work that I've done in the last good 20 years, it's all like, I'm drawing digitally, right? When I do a lot of the
Yeah.
work that I do, freelance, et cetera, working on projects. But I still think that it's a little weird, and I prefer to a pencil and paper or paint and brush or whatever. And I kind of prefer the art that was done in that way,
Hmm.
honestly. I mean, I think anyway, that's that's just opinion.
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
mean,
won't
yeah, maybe you could
I won't rag on
be
you for it.
specific and say this is why it's better, but anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, Lucasfilm, that job ended. I came back to Toronto. I basically, bopped around, and it was like partly Nelvana, partly. Actually, I ended up starting to freelance then, and ended up in a studio with about three or four guys that we rented a space, and one of them was Paul again, Paul Ravoche.
Hmm.
And that was a lot of fun, actually. That was a good experience,
Yeah.
and that lasted for about 3 or 4 years, and let's see what happened then. Dissolved. It ended up in those years. It was kind of a combination of, doing a lot of animation pre-production work, storyboard design, layout, that kind of thing. Ended up working on a few things that remain nameless, but that those were the years of Strawberry Shortcake and Care Bears and things like that. I worked a little bit on those things, and then
Yeah.
Inspector Gadget. Inspector Gadget was kind of fun because I actually had more of a role in that in the storyboard side,
Yeah.
and ended up as a result getting a chance to go over to Asia to help supervise some stuff. So I got to see
Really?
Taiwan as it existed in those days. And again,
Yeah.
this was, the place was called Cuckoo's Nest, which would
Yeah,
be
yeah. I
familiar to a lot
remember
of
that.
people because, yeah, they were one of the studios. Like it took a lot of, what was the word for it?
Like
There was a word for that.
freelance,
Uh, farmed out,
outsourced. Yeah,
farmed out
farmed out.
animation work, yeah, production work,
Yeah, for like
and
Tiny
they
Toons
were
and
amazing.
Warner
They were
Brothers and things
amazing.
like
I
that.
mean, it just, yeah. And then and that was followed by because it was kind of, that initial that first season of Gadget. It was a co-production between Nelvana and Deke
Deke? Deke, yes.
Enterprises, DIC, who were based in Paris and also in Tokyo. So they had their fingers in a ton of pies, and they had a whole bunch of stuff they were doing at the same time.
Oh yeah.
But as a result, I got to go to Tokyo as well, for a couple of
Really?
months. Yeah. So it
Was
was
that
myself
for
and
Gadget as
and
well?
there was a group of us yeah, that was to do with the Gadget project. Yeah.
Ah, cool.
But again, it was just that was interesting because that was the first time I got to see what I had not really paid attention to up to then, kind of the whole anime industry.
Yeah.
I hadn't really seen any anime that I thought was any good. I really didn't,
Hmm.
pay attention to it much. This is like, 82, 83.
Yeah.
And I remember, I will never forget the evening. And like again, this is what I was saying. It's about, the people you meet, the things you remember, the friends you make, all that kind of stuff. You get to know all these a couple a couple of the Japanese animators invited us over to their apartment for an evening,
Yeah.
and you're communicating and chatting as best you can, and one guy just suddenly, or not suddenly, but after a while, he gets this videotape because we're in the era of VCR now,
Yeah, yeah.
and this is really good, and he puts it on. Well, it was Castle of Cagliostro, by Miyazaki, eh?
Mm-hmm.
And I just went. I watched that and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I'd never seen anything quite like it. I mean, like as I said, the stuff that was kind of getting broadcast here at home, the anime that had come in, it was stuff like Battleship Yamato and things like that. Uh, what's the other thing? Macross, and I just kind of
Speed
went, oh,
Racer.
But anyway, that was it. But plus the stuff that I saw them doing in the studio when we were there. I mean, it was just the way that they worked, the process. It was admirable because, of course, it was like anime has got this, I'll say hundreds or thousands of years of Japanese visual tradition behind it, right? All
Mm-hmm.
that in just absolutely beautiful Japanese design that had been going on in all their woodcuts and their architecture and their, the native native costumes. That's not the right word for it.
Like
Um,
traditional stuff.
traditional, yeah, traditional uh, 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 garb. Let's put it
I was
that
gonna
way.
say garb.
Well, something like that. Like, the kimonos, etc., the armor.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I saw some of that up close, and of course, things like modern Tokyo. Just
Yeah.
and this is when Japan was the economic juggernaut of the world.
Mm-hmm.
For a while there, it just was beating the pants off of everybody,
Everything
and
looked futuristic even back in like the 70s
oh,
and
well, yeah,
80s.
and then the city itself looked absolutely futuristic.
Like just
But
covered in lights and blah blah
but I
blah.
remember one of the things they had, like the subways. You'd go into the subways, and the the decoration, like there would be ads on the wall, of course, but they
Yeah.
were these giant, like 8 by 16 foot posters, and it would be for a department store, and it would be something beautiful. I mean, it was, very nice. It's like maybe a completely red field with just a thing and a thing, and then,
Yeah.
us, and compared to, what you tended to see in
I
North
know it makes us
America,
look
by
boring by
far.
comparison.
Oh, absolutely.
Like I was
Anyway, so
just
that plus
yeah.
the animation thing, plus you had these stores which were of course devoted completely to animation, and
Mhm.
you'd go in and there'd be the My Little Pony store, and it'd be full of anything to do with that you could think of would have My Little Pony on it.
Mhm.
And again, this is kind of the thing that just hadn't really arrived in North America yet.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that was the summer of, I want to say, 84 or 85. Anyway, after that, it was back to more freelance, just around Toronto,
Yeah.
several things, and actually, that was when I actually began to do some teaching. Uh,
Ah,
I
okay.
have taught now for off and on, like for several years, kind of in conjunction with the art career,
Yeah.
and found I really liked it. I mean, I found that I there's something about teaching. And I mean, I really enjoyed being in school and I enjoyed having good teachers. Of course, we all do.
Of course.
And then something of that, like, obviously rubbed off on me because I found I enjoyed teaching myself. And I enjoyed it when I knew I was being a good teacher, this kind of
Mhm.
thing. And I would say that of all of it, that's the one thing that Lucas got right, in all of Star Wars is that the whole business of, there are always two, the master and the apprentice, right?
Mhm.
And I mean that plugs into again my interest in history because I mean I'm very aware of things like the sort of the academic tradition, like, in the old days, if you showed a predilection for something in a village, they might say, "Oh, he's kind of good at this. We should get him attached to, a workshop." So of
Mhm.
course it'd be a work, and this could be stonemasons, This could be, calligraphy and illumination. It could be armor making. It could be linens. Anyway, it would be architecture, quite likely. Anyway, but more often than not, something involving I'll call it the decorative arts, pottery and, woodwork and all these kinds of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, so I mean, what would happen is that you would end up going and you study under a master, uh, you know, in Renaissance Italy or whatever it is, and you would do stuff and you would, of course, copy everything the master had done, right? I mean, th that gets into a whole thing about, visual art these days. There's this big stigma about copying, which rightly so. I mean, you can't copy something and call it your own, but
Yeah.
part of the process is definitely finding something that you like or that you can do well, and you learn from doing somebody else's work, seeing how they kind of figure out how they handle stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and then you work away at that for however many years it was, and then if you did get good enough, the rest of the masters would get together and deem you, that you were good enough, and you would be asked to create a masterpiece, right? That's where we
Mm-hmm.
get the word. And then that would be submitted, and they would judge it, and if you were good enough, you became a master too, and then you went out on your own and started a thing of your own. Anyway, so there's all that.
Yeah.
But
So
okay, so again, uh, the timelines. What happened was that, yeah, so I taught at Sheridan for a little while in that time as well.
yeah.
And now the next big thing came along was Bluth. So then Bluth was Don Bluth, who had, uh, in the history of things, departed Disney, had gone on his own, had done, was really a crusader for, trying for the rejuvenation of classical animation, right?
Right.
And had done Secret of Nim, and then based on that had gotten to do American Tail. Okay, so that was his first big commercial success.
Yeah.
And based on that, I guess it was the dinosaur one. I think
Land
was
Before
after that.
Time. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the middle of that, he had basically moved operations from LA to Ireland. He was just setting up in Ireland. Like this was because I think he was business reasons. He was looking for a place where he could do business a little more cheaply, and I
Yeah.
think Ireland had lots of tax benefits. So anyway, he showed up at Sheridan and basically, kind of, did a bit, did a presentation, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we were all certainly well aware of the man before that
Mm-hmm.
and knew what he was all about. And anyway, and he was recruiting, so I basically got recruited at that point. So I ended up going over to Ireland to work for Bluth, and that took up about the next 3 years. And so I ended up working on things like, well, not Land Before Time, but all the ones after that, which was
Yeah. All Dogs Go to
All
Heaven.
Dogs Go to Heaven, Rock-a-Doodle, Troll in Central Park,
Pebble and the
uh,
Penguin, I believe.
Penguin, Thumbelina. I did a lot of work on
Cool.
all those.
I was going to
So,
say that I saw on your IMDb that now it might be
oh,
accurate, it
which is
might not
probably
be.
way out of date. I haven't even. How does that work? Are you supposed to like post update it yourself?
I don't know. It's really
Because
hard. Yeah,
it was just there when I went. It was,
yeah.
I
Like
went,
there's
who put this on there?
some people just put stuff there, and then some people, like the creators or the actors, are like they try to correct it, and then sometimes they can't. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's really
yeah.
weird. But it says on
Well,
yours that you were a backup singer on Rock-a-Doodle. Can you tell me if that's true or not?
that's not true. No, I
Ha.
maybe there was the background of that would be that there were, yeah, I mean, people who ended up like in-house artists who were also musicians. You know how that can be.
Yeah, yeah.
And some of those guys ended up contributing to the soundtrack. Some of the.
Mm-hmm.
So there's probably, I know there was, what happened was that we kind of formed up, and that was myself, T. Dan Hofstede, okay, was kind of the ringleader there. Man,
Yeah.
and there was myself, and there was Mark Swan, Charlie Bonifacio, Kevin Gallagher, and a guy called Dan Mills, who is working down at another studio down the road, which was, I gotta say, Murakami Wolf or something, I think it was, who were
Yeah.
a fairly big name at the time. They did a lot of production. They were a production house.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he's another guy from LA, who kind of not elderly, but an older fellow,
Hmm.
sort of from the great generation of animation. Anyway, so we had a blast because we just got together and we just sang a lot of stuff. And
Hmm.
there may have been something in there where maybe we actually got recorded,
Huh.
uh, and something got used in the soundtrack. But that's
Interesting.
I have no memory of anything specific in that regard.
Yeah, no one told
So
you
yeah,
like,
so
"Hey,
yeah.
sing for this." No, maybe I don't know. Interesting though.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. It would have been just backup vocals or something. Actually, I
Yeah,
will say this about that. I mean, Rock-a-Doodle is a rather underrated film. I mean,
I've heard things about it. Haven't seen it
it's a
myself, but
little peculiar. I mean, again, it's a product of many things, and one was that, if you recall, that's when Amblin, was it Amblin? Yeah, was
yeah.
making Rabbit. And of course, this is all percolating through the system. And then, so we were already in the middle uh, of Rock-a-Doodle, and well, I think maybe just kind of getting going. Maybe the story hadn't been completely nailed down yet. And then Don decided that he needed to include some live action in it. So that ended up, resulting in the whole business of the live action bookends and so on, which is actually kind of an old trope, really. I mean,
Oh
but
yeah,
that again was a thing that you've seen. You used to see in a
way
lot of,
back.
yeah, certain feature films, like Mr. Limpet and things like that, right? Yeah.
Anchors Away. I'm thinking that I know that one for sure. You know that one? Anchors
Oh yeah,
Away
yeah, that's that segment.
with Tom and Jerry in it.
Yeah, which is from one of the MGM musicals. Uh,
Yeah.
but I mean, the idea that you'd have, you'd start the thing in live action and then go into animation. Oh, see, remember the Phantom Toll Booth was another one of those.
Phantom
That was a
Toll
Chuck
Booth.
Jones animation.
Huh.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
it's like these are forgotten now. Or I think didn't Raggedy Ann and Andy start off live action and it goes off into the world and then it comes back, kind of ties it all up.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, but the thing is, like, there was I mean, they got just the casting. They got the Glenn Campbell, who, if you recall, was a fairly big deal at the time. He was a country and western singer, and he
Yeah,
did
yeah,
a
yeah.
dynamite Elvis impersonation.
Hmm.
So he was the voice, of Rock-a-Doodle there, as because it was just an Elvis movie, right? It was supposed to be
Yeah,
just a
yeah.
bit of fluff, and then we got Phil Harris to come out of retirement to do one of the
Hmm.
characters. He was the big kind of bloodhound character guy.
Yeah.
And, like, again, Phil Harris is a legend, you know, in animation and, well, entertainment circles.
Yeah.
And then they got I can't remember their names, the backup singers for Elvis. They got those guys.
Like
Uh,
legitimately backup singers for Elvis.
yeah, what were their names? Something Tones or something. Anyway, I can't remember now. So yeah, the fellow who wrote the music, those were actually good, pretty good little tunes anyway. So and there actually is a lot of uh good animation in that movie.
Hmm.
So
I'll have to
there you
give it a
go.
watch one of these days.
Yeah, give it a try.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'd say it's the kind of thing that's probably due for restoration. I mean, that's the problem, a lot of these things.
Yeah, definitely.
The production values, as best as we tried to make them, probably haven't really they tend not to look all that great anymore. Well, because of, again, what are you dealing with? I mean,
Hmm.
again, these days, like in those days, you were dealing with camera stands, acetate, paint, a lot of dust, like production
Hair.
value was really difficult, you know. Like now, nowadays, of course, digital has solved all that.
Hmm.
But anyway, so again, very quickly, so that was Ireland, and then I came back from Ireland. Again, just reasons. Um,
Yeah.
Worked for the studio for about another year beyond that, which was fun.
Yeah.
And then it was back into doing, freelance. And after a couple of years of that, Disney called, because they were
They just
obviously
called
kind
you.
of on a roll. Well, no. And actually, here's something that we need to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, People will often say, well, how do you get into the business? How do you account for, all the things you've done during your career, et cetera, et cetera? And yes, some of that, depending, can be, you propel some of that yourself. I mean, that just kind of depends on how much of a go-getter you are, really. And
Yeah.
honestly, I'm not much of a go-getter. Frankly, I think most of the things that I've done just arrived. They kind of came along for whatever reason. But one of
Yeah.
those reasons I think is really it's propelled by decisions you make like earlier on, really. And you really can't predict these things, like you just kind of you make decisions and some of them may haunt you and others may, really like
Bear
turn
fruit.
into wonderful things. I mean, that's it's not really a novel idea. I mean, people are always saying, "Oh yeah, it's like, you meet somebody early in your career and then, later on they turn out to be, a stepping not a stepping stone, but I
Yeah.
mean, it's something where they, they come back and they you meet up again later." So it was just that again, all these Americans were working with Don over in Ireland and got to know several of them, of course, and was working pretty closely with, mostly the layout guys and the background guys and the guys who were, kind of serving as what would you say, sort of like art directors. I don't think there was ever an art director credit on Don's films, but anyway. Oh,
Right.
Don, I shouldn't say that. There was a guy called Don. Well, I've forgotten his last name. M Martin, Don Morris, Don. Oh, this is terrible.
Oh,
Who
that's
is a
okay.
who was really good, and he'd been with them for like years and years. And yes, he certainly was kind of the guy that everyone deferred to in terms of art direction. However, it was just that, yeah, Ireland, Sultan Bluth kind of falls apart. People go to the Four Winds. Some people go here, there. I go to Canada. A lot of them went back to the States. And then, of course, what has been happening in the States at Disney in particular, just at that moment?
Just a little renaissance.
A
Nothing too
little
crazy.
Renaissance. That's right. Yeah, a little something.
It
A little girl
happens.
with some red hair and a fishtail. Yeah, and and then from that where that built right. It was like the subsequent features.
Yeah, yeah, like
Like
Aladdin,
Aladdin and
Lion
so on.
King.
And well, that was just it. And then well, let's see. So anyway, a lot of people, obviously, and I'm going to say it was also because of the guys who were in charge, like Eisner and Katzenberg. They obviously had big plans. They began after Little Mermaid, they began to make bigger plans for animation. So
Yeah.
of course, like we're going to like start, creating a slate of animated pictures. That means we need people to make them. So hiring was on. And it
Yeah.
was just simply that, yeah, I mean, I got this call, and it was one of the guys that I'd worked for at Bluth had ended up being selected to be, well, actually art director on Hunchback is what it was all about. And of
Nice.
course, this guy, he knew me. I mean, I've been drawing medieval stuff like all the time, and because we took trips all over the place when we were in Ireland, we went and visited, all kinds of historic sites, and we'd be talking all the time. Anyway, I mean, not me and him together. I mean, everybody did this.
Yeah.
And so anyway, he was saying, Scott, there's going to be a lot of, we got this cathedral we have to get on screen.
Hmm.
We want you down here. So that's kind of what happened. So I
Nice.
ended up going down and joining the layout department. Uh, and it was glorious. Yeah, I mean, it was for many reasons. I mean, number one, it was just, yeah, the subject matter was fun. I mean, it's arguable. I mean, there's the whole thing of, like it was medieval, but it was still kind of Disney medieval.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but that's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but there was that, and just the fact that, really for me, it was kind of a point of pilgrimage. I mean, it all kind of happened at the right time in my life. Um, I mean, of course, you're always aware of Disney, and Disney's legacy, and there was, I still say there are some things that Disney has done, that just are at the top of the cinematic pantheon. I mean, they really did some things over the years that you can't fault.
Yeah.
And plus the fact that just the history of the thing, I mean, all the history that had happened in animation kind of had all come from that place, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, to be there finally and see the things at work there, to see the people, to meet the people, to also just to sort of be able to check out the rest of Los Angeles and Southern California. And oh, just things like, you gotta everybody got this pass to Disneyland, this silver pass. Like you go down there anytime you want it for free.
Did you take advantage of
And
that?
I had like a 3-year-old daughter at the time, and so when we moved, of course, she was kind of at the right age to, enjoy all that kind of
Oh
thing.
yeah.
And of course, yeah, and that was the first time I'd ever gone to Disneyland. And I'm walking around going, huh, and you sort of begin to realize, I mean, I'd read about this before, but you begin to realize, the designers of the park and so on, who were, of course, culled from the animation studio. You'd walk around a corner, and you'd sort of see and and it was beautiful, and you go, these guys, they were they did this deliberately, they
Yeah.
really made sure. I mean, things like, oh, I don't know, something out of the uh just out of the hat, the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. I mean,
Hmm.
which of course has been, you know, given it's gotten a lot more attention, of course, because of, the recent slate of movies, the what's the word for it that made out of it? Um,
Trilogy, quadrology.
well, that, but I mean, they basically turned it into like a
Cinematic universe.
I was going to say an SIT pile of money, is what they did. But that ride still rang true. I mean, it was like very much like you just that the way that they organized it. You get in the little boat and then you go and everything's very quiet. You hear the crickets and you see the fireflies and you hear the banjo twanging and you're in the bayou. And then way up around the corner, you sort of hear, "Dead men tell no tales," and then bang, and then suddenly all hell breaks loose, and then you're going through these little vignettes, and these vignettes of a pirate, you know, grotto, and then something else and a something else, and then you come around the corner, and then there's this well, it's that ship that's basically doing a cutting in expedition on the Jamaican town, right?
Yeah.
And they've got little mouse traps going under the water that's setting up, the spray, et cetera,
Yeah.
Anyway, and I gotta say, like, it's all like they do their homework. I mean, um, a big theme of mine would be that in all the things I've been in or that I've seen, the stuff that rings true is when you can tell that somebody's done his homework and that they've done some research to give it that ring of truth, to give it some authenticity. Whether
Yeah.
it's, making sure that a sword is correct, to the time period or something.
Hmm.
But the thing that got me, I remember to this day about the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. There's some point there where you kind of go into an archway and you're kind of going, yeah, you're going into the town where the pirates have been like laying waste for a while, and there's the crackling of fire, these glowing, uh, burnt logs that are like glowing embers,
Ooh.
and then you hear this sound. It's this pink. It's like glass breaking,
Yeah.
and there's that sound when something's been on fire for a while. It's pretty hot,
Hmm.
and like a window will break, because of the heat of a fire,
Yeah.
and that was in the soundscape that they created. And it was like spooky as all get out. I mean, of course it's goofy because then
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
see, the pirates chasing around the girls and what is it? What are some of the other ones? The dog with the key in his mouth and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But they did that other stuff which just goes right to your soul,
Yeah.
and that's what makes the experience. And I mean, you can sort of see that, like, again, there are aspects of Star Wars that reach that that uh, that deep,
Hmm.
and then that's what makes you go with the rest of it,
Yeah.
or
Totally.
whatever else. I mean, you could. Oh, I've thought about this a lot. I mean, in animation, obviously in live action too, that there are definitely things, certain, scenes. There's a little thing. I mean, we all definitely subscribe to, there's all this devotion to story and so on, but there's a famous quotation by one of the movie moguls from, the early years of Hollywood, and he goes, with the cigar. You're like, movies are made of moments, and then you sort of think about that. And yeah, like there are certain moments in the movies that you just that really stay with you.
Oh
Uh,
yeah,
and you can think of any number of those. But
totally.
anyway, but yeah, getting back to that little thing about authenticity. So let me think. Let's pick up in the timeline. So there I was at Disney. I was there for 6 years, and
Yeah.
I worked on several of the those 2D features that they made. That would have been Hunchback, and I worked on Fantasia some. I worked on Mulan some, and then I
Emperor's
was
New
on the
Groove.
Emperor's New Groove. But although I was on it before it became Emperor's New Groove, that's a little bit of a
Oh
story
yeah, yeah.
because
The
I had been tapped to lead the layout department, uh, and it was still at that point it was just called Kingdom of
the
the
sun
Sun. That's
god.
what it
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
Yeah, Kingdom of the Sun. And so it was still a bit of a melodrama, and for whatever reason, there was some second guessing, and they decided to, and I'm sure you know the whole story to that. I mean, I can't really add too much to it, except I would say if no one has seen that documentary that is out there on the it's called, oh boy, the Sweatbox, or
The
maybe it's just called
Sweatbox.
Sweatbox, and it was kind of done under the radar. So I mean, there we had, so they'd managed to sign Sting on to do the numbers, to do the
Yeah.
music for that one, right? I mean, and this is all part of the ongoing tradition of snagging, huge popular, musical talent, to headline your project.
Of course.
And so Sting was on that one, but his wife was a documentary filmmaker, and so part of his deal was that she would be allowed to come into all the meetings and film, and she did. And there's some pretty remarkable stuff in that movie because it's stuff that normally you would never see or hear. And yeah, I mean, it was a bit unfortunate because it kind of meant that some people kind of came out you know a little damaged. But anyway,
Yeah.
suffice to say that they decided to flip the whole thing and make it into this lightweight comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of musical chairs that happened at that point. So I ended up not being part of that part of the movie. And
I see.
I ended up going over to Atlantis, actually. That's what I did.
Oh,
And
cool.
then Atlantis was, for the next couple of years, and that was fine. And
Mm-hmm.
then, well, actually, what happened then was that, like, there was an animator who had been on Hunchback, and I don't know, for some reason, kind of liked my stuff. Anyway, he was pals with Brad Bird, and he ended up departing the studio and going over to join Brad when he was making Iron Giant over at Warner's.
Yeah.
This is the other thing that was going on. I mean, this is the high times of,
Like
2D
2D
feature animation.
animations.
Like,
Anybody
Lion
could do
King
it.
went so big that it made a pot of money, and all the other studios suddenly went, "Oh, gee, animation can make money. Yeah, we
Yeah.
should do that some of that too." So yeah, I mean, it didn't last,
Nah.
but it was glory days for folks like us, who were just kind of the working types, because there was tons of work, and what's more, there was work with budgets, and
Yeah.
therefore you could actually really get into and try and do something that looked good,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, we didn't always succeed, sorry, completely as films, but some of them did, and like
Yeah.
like Iron Giant, and they actually had asked me to come over and work on Iron Giant, and I said, well, I'm already in the middle of all the stuff here at Disney, and my work permit didn't really permit it. So
Yeah.
anyway, I didn't do that. Um, but at the sort of towards the end of things, on uh, Atlantis, and was kind of curious, wondering where things were going to go. They came back to me and said, "Okay, we got this other project which we're going to get off the ground, and would like to have you as a designer on it." So, so I thought, okay, and of course that turned out to be Incredibles,
Of
and
course.
that's why I ended up going to Pixar. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not sure I would ever have gotten into Pixar, kind of under my own whatever.
Yeah.
But there was Brad. And of course, at that time, it was supposed to be still a 2D feature. That's what they were planning to do. And so Brad had the idea, and he was shopping it around. And yeah, that's when Lasseter said, "Oh, let's do it at Pixar." And, of course, it'll be a CG film at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I basically kind of rode in there on his coattails. That's really what happened. But again, that was a glorious adventure, terrific experience, and yeah, I worked on worked on one of the good ones. It was
Yeah.
kind of on that one. I mean, of course, it was all about the world building for the family, the Parr family there, and basically Brad's notes were that, well, it's a retro futuristic world, or not too much. I mean, we did a lot of work originally where we were really making it retro future, real Tomorrowland,
Yeah.
and it was too much. We were just kind of like, I remember at one meeting he just said, "Well, we don't need to redesign dinner, you know." You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Like
because it
pills
gets
or
in the way.
something.
Yeah, it kind of gets in the way. You're trying to say something with your characters or story, but you've got them all eating, I don't know, tacos with antennas coming out of them or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Crazy.
Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, again, I had a pretty good knowledge of that era. I mean, I was born in the 50s, so not that I remember have many direct memories of it, but
I don't remember
just
the
the temper of the
90s, so
times.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Um, I kind of knew. I like to think I kind of knew where he was coming from
Yeah.
in terms of what he wanted for stuff to look like. And I mean, of course, the idea was you just brought in tons and tons of reference, and that again, hopefully, informed a lot of the designs, and you know, yeah, that's a whole thing. Again, I just you try and build a world that has a lot of interest, but then has some truth to it. Has things that um, well, I don't know, things that that the characters can be attached to, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it kind of goes
yeah.
back to the whole authenticity thing where it's like it's not,
Hmm.
100%.
Yeah.
It feels like it is.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I
yeah,
mean, like you
it's
want
got
to
that vibe.
feel like you've evoked kind of a time period, all right? I mean, uh, again, it's a bit of a catch-all because I mean, it wasn't like we were trying to do the 50s or
Yeah.
60s, but yeah, and a lot of the color choices and the design shapes, the design language certainly was that, or the music, I mean, like the music was, of course, pure Bond. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like Brad very much wanted to evoke those early James Bond films, right?
Oh
And sort of
yeah.
their sort of devil may care, they're serious, but at the same time, you know,
Mm-hmm. Still a
they're
lot of
kind of a
fun.
romp, really. Yeah.
Yeah. That's like my
And
favorite kind of music, I have to say.
oh yeah, well, I mean, everybody likes it. I mean, here's the thing, like they actually talked to John Barry about actually doing Sir John Barry at that point,
Hmm.
um, about the music for that. But he kind of went, nah, I'm kind of, I'm kind of beyond all that stuff because I mean, like, I mean, he has done. I mean, even before, other than Bond, he did so much soundtrack, so much composition for like really great movies, very different stuff. I'll tell you, like, go watch Lion in Winter. Are you familiar with that film?
Nope.
It's an old film. It's from the 60s. It's a medieval. It's a it was based on a play. Katharine Hepburn, Peter O'Toole, Anthony Hopkins. I mean, Anthony Hopkins, who is still like, top of his game.
Yeah.
And he was in there. He's plays like Richard the Lionheart, and the family has problems. It's a family problem story, is what it is, wrapped around the kind of early Middle Ages. But anyway,
Interesting.
he wrote some music for that, which is very different. It's like um, sort of medieval, but still, soundtrack like.
Yeah.
And then he did the music for another big one would have been Out of Africa. I don't know, did you ever see that? Or again, you see, here's the thing. Here's the thing I would say to young people. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's gotten worse because I was going to say, go see movies. You really should have an encyclopedic knowledge of the movies if you're going to be working in the business. and
Definitely.
Brad had it.
It shows.
If you were having lunch with Brad or you're at the table with Brad somewhere, and he'd start talking about the latest film by no, I've lost the man's name. Anderson. Uh,
I knew you were going to say
Not
Wes
Wes
Anderson.
Anderson. No, not Wes Anderson. It was
No.
if I got the right name, who did things like Let There
S-
Be Blood and The Master and I want to say somebody Thomas Anderson. Anyway, and I think he's passed away now, honestly. But
hmm
or stuff like that, or or the Coen brothers. Oh, because
Yeah,
everybody
yeah.
knows the Coen brothers.
I know the Coen brothers.
Or the old Ealing comedies. The ones there's this pair of directors called Powell and Pressburger who directed a number of films in the English films back in the 30s and 40s, which are you know pinnacle of stuff. You probably heard of a few of them. Anyway, he had a lot of stuff at his fingertips, and yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And if he talks about it, you want to be able to know what he's talking about,
Yeah, it's
if
like,
you're
of
sitting
course
there
I
at the
know what
table.
this
So
is.
yeah, yeah. But and of course it's gotten difficult because like each year that goes by, there's just more and more movies that you're supposed to have seen.
hmm
I sure haven't kept up with everything. Yeah, there's like still tons and tons of movies I haven't seen, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, me too. I just saw, what's it called? When we were talking about rock and roll, I saw, the movie Heavy Metal?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
I know I
another.
interviewed for that.
Oh, you did?
Well, yeah, it was one of the things that was hiring when I was just getting out of third year at Sheridan, and yeah, there was so the choices were kind of one of the choices, was Nelvana, and then there was this thing up in Montreal that was being put together based on the heavy metal magazine. So I went up and talked to them, and I was aware of things. I ended up not doing it. I think partly I was just not quite up for like moving that far, like to a completely different cultural experience. Now, I shouldn't say that because it's not like I was particularly afraid of, Montreal or anything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah. Now, anyway, so suffice to say, I didn't go for it. But in those days, I'm always saying it in those days. That's terrible to say. But one of the things that would get you hired at that point in the industry was quite honestly, is simply if you could draw. I mean,
Yeah.
really, that was the coin of the realm. That was the thing that would get you. If you could, they knew. I think if they knew if you could draw, if you could show that you were just really good draftsman, you probably could pick up any number of things.
hmm
You could do layout, you could do animation, you could do, I mean, that would just be a matter of just learning those specific pursuits, right?
Yeah.
And that's really changed now. It seems like people are coming right straight out of school with the idea of, specializing in something.
hmm
Like, they're being asked, are or you're kind of being asked to think of yourself as a character designer, a location designer, a concept artist, all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And it used to be really much more of an umbrella,
hmm
thing. It was just, well, if can you draw and paint? Yeah, great, we can use you, and then they'd go from there.
yeah.
And yeah, that's interesting. And that kind of almost brings me up to date because,
Yeah.
that was already 20 years ago, but um, there was a situation where I unfortunately didn't get picked up by Pixar after that. So we ended up, and there was a little bit of a downturn going on. So I actually wasn't able to get another job in California at that point. So we basically just came back to Canada. And then
Yeah.
since then I've been freelancing. I've done some stuff. I freelanced for Aardman, for DreamWorks, for Bluesky. I did a lot of stuff for Bluesky actually. In fact, the last
Yeah.
thing I did for Bluesky, which was way back in 2016, I think, was when they were just getting Nimona off the ground.
Yeah.
And so I ended up doing about several months of work on Nimona for those guys. This is Tom Cardone really would be the guy I would give a shout out to. He was one of their main art directors, and he had come to me. I'd worked on the uh, uh, what was it? The Horton movie they did, and I worked on the Ferdinand movie, and yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
and he also knew that I liked medieval stuff. So figured I'd be a good guy to, take this medieval future thing and give it a try. So I did that. Yeah. But anyway, all I can say is that, that went on for a bit and then it ended. And then,
Everyone thought it was dead.
well, I mean, I went on to other things, and I guess they of course carried on with it until, you know,
Yeah.
Disney, bought the 20th Century and then shut down Blue Sky.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but obviously the guys managed to what's the word for it? Kind of, pick up the project and carry
Yeah.
on with it. And look what happened.
Mm-hmm.
They got it done and it looks amazing.
Yep.
So yeah, and even better, I mean, I wasn't contacted at all, but I actually got a credit on it.
Oh,
I have
cool.
a credit for visual development, and for that I thank them because yeah,
Yeah.
that was an awfully nice thing. They didn't have to do that. In fact, if
Mm-hmm.
I'm right, I think if you go and look, I think they pretty much list the entire Blue Sky studio in the credits at the end of that movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, yeah,
That's pretty cool.
that is very cool. That is being, what's the word for it? That is being a true warrior or something like that. I don't know
Something
what you
like that.
call it,
Like a
when
champion of the
showing
people or
respect to your
something.
fallen foes, all this kind of thing.
Yeah. In that
Showing
ballpark.
respect for sure. Yeah. Anyway, so that's where we are now. So I'm basically kind of, sitting here in my studio, not really
Mm-hmm.
working on anything at the moment, but I've got some stuff that I'm kind of just doing on my own here. Um, I keep in touch with people as best I can, all
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Still got
Uh,
still got lots of stuff I would like to do. It's just a matter of
yeah.
um
I
getting
was gonna ask, yeah, like anything that you haven't done yet that are like that it would be really cool if I could
oh,
do this or blah blah
well, I
blah.
gotta say, I've always wanted to do a short film. I mean, definitely. I mean, like, or certainly get something of my own out there. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing because, in my career, I mean, basically, I'm one of these guys who, got out of school and basically worked for other people all my career. And I didn't really do anything of my own. I mean, like I didn't, I'm not a Sam Watterson, not Sam. Who's that?
Bill
Is that his first name?
Watterson?
Bill, sorry, Bill Watterson.
I
Who,
know that one.
or someone like that who like, creates a comic or a property or an IP or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's lots of people who kind of are known more for their own work, right? And I
Right.
I have lots of those who I definitely admire. And I'm not sure. I mean, uh, I've, I've got some time left. I
Yeah, yeah.
figure
I think so.
still hopefully get them, but I can't waste any time, which is
Mm-hmm.
what I do. I waste colossal amounts of time. Anyway,
Well, that gives me hope for because I do
yeah.
waste
Well,
time too.
yeah. Well, start now. Yeah, that's what I'd say. Like, stop wasting time now, and
Yeah. I can waste time later.
but yeah, my a short film, a book. I had a couple of I kind of got somewhere with like just a book on drawing for a while. I mean, I sort of have it over there on the shelf,
Yeah.
but I just haven't like taken it to a publisher or anything like that. So, or
Hmm.
possibly, I would like to do a little bit more um personal work that might end up, be something that would be, stuff that people could buy prints of, all that kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
so that's
totally.
I haven't really done.
I going back to like when you were working with Pixar and stuff. I checked
Yeah.
like your other bodies of work and it said you got involved with like video games as well, like with Heavy Iron Studios
Oh yeah,
with
yeah. That
visual
was kind of
development.
well, that was a follow on from Pixar. I mean, really,
Yeah.
that kind of took up the slack after I left Pixar. I got an introduction to the guys who were doing the games for the Pixar project.
Yeah.
So, and they said, "Oh yeah, we can use you." And so I ended up doing, and that was a lot of fun, honestly. I did a ton of work for at that point it would have been the Wally
THQ.
game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was THX was the name of the outfit.
THQ.
Or THQ, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
THQ.
That's okay.
Yeah, not THX.
That's the sound. Those are the sound
Specifically,
guys.
they were called Heavy Iron Studios. I mean, they were down in LA. So,
Yeah.
that was fun because it meant some, there was some trips back and forth. I got to go down, and of course, when I went down, I'd visit with other folks while I was there. Um, but yeah, I mean, basically, I just kind of was coming up with a lot of like gameplay ideas, really. I mean, that's one thing I was doing. Like they would just say, well, we've got the little guy, Wally, and he's okay. I mean, we know what he does in the movie, but in the game, he basically has to get from A to B um, by well, one of the things would be by compacting trash in that little container V,
Yeah.
that little toaster oven he had in his in his chest.
Mm-hmm.
And these little cubes would be produced, and then of course these cubes could have different properties, to help advance you in the game, right? That was one of the things. And then they also wanted to do a thing where it was sort of like a big Rube Goldberg machine,
Yeah.
so that in order to get from here to here, yeah, he would
This thing
have to
jumps off this thing
jump
and
here, and
then
then this thing swings
activates
around, and
this
then it
thing.
hits that, and da-doink and da-doink, da-doink. And I did so much work, like working out those kinds of things. And I mean, yeah, I never really played the game, so I don't know how much of it actually got in there.
Mm-hmm.
But oh, I should say before that there was the Incredibles game. That's right. There was
Yeah, and the
the
like pseudo sequel, Rise of the Underminer, which was kind
yeah,
of cool
yeah, there was
before we got an actual Incredibles 2.
yeah, and they actually went back and used it. I know,
Yeah,
but um, but wait, wasn't that at the very end of
so, like at the end
number
of the
one?
first movie, they brought
Yeah, they
out
just kind of
the Underminer guy, but then they actually made a video game called Incredibles: Rise of the Underminer that took
right,
place.
right, right.
But yeah, like I haven't played that, and I haven't played a lot of movie-based games, but yeah, do you remember doing stuff for anything specific on that game?
Oh yeah.
Cause
I
yeah,
if I dug a bit, I'd find some artwork for it. I mean, it
ooh,
was again just it was a little bit of a well, there was a lot of this cave stuff, and the techno stuff was supposed to look a little bit more beaten up, sort of a little more Jules Verne, like all the sort of I want to say the vibe of the Underminer's technical world.
mm-hmm.
But so yeah, so I said there was a fair bit of that. It was a lot of it would be preliminary sketches. Unfortunately, I never really I would never have the chance to take anything to a final. I mean, one reason being that they had people there who were their color guys. So I mean, I never really worked much in color,
Mm-hmm.
and that was kind of the same. That's been kind of the same throughout because of when you're doing layout, there's always this separation of the steps of the production process
Right.
in commercial animation for the most part. And one's layout. And then when you finish your layout, you hand it off, it goes to the background department, and then somebody does it in color. So I
Sketches are
never
still cool.
really, huh?
Sketches are still cool.
Yeah, well, that's just it. I mean, sketches are wonderful because
Yeah.
again, they show process. They kind of
Mm-hmm.
show some thinking. Um, but there was that one, and then there was the Up. They were doing the Up the game
Mm-hmm.
kind of at the same time as they were making the movie. So again, there was
Yeah.
like tons of work there. And but it's fun because with the games they'll take the the gameplay into sort of other areas that maybe that don't feature in the movies.
Yeah.
There was a whole bunch of stuff with Up where they were like going down into those the tepui, the big stone formations.
Mm-hmm.
They had to go down into them, and there was all these gameplay that involved climbing through caverns and getting through stalactites and all kinds of other obstacles.
There's something
Uh,
like
yeah.
the Lion King video game that came out in the 90s. Like, there's a bunch of things in that game that are not in the movie, and a lot of people were wondering, where did this stuff come from? And the guys who made the game said,
Oh
oh,
yeah.
it was all from Disney. It was all at some point in the movie, but they took it out
Oh
or
yeah. Yeah.
something.
They're always talking to each other. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
certainly, the higher ups from THQ certainly would always be having meetings with and there was always all kinds of meetings to make sure they were supposedly keeping the standard up and all that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Making
well,
sure not
Wally wouldn't
making. Yeah.
actually do that. Okay,
Yeah.
really? Well, okay.
Wally wouldn't pull out a gun.
Well, that's true. No, yeah, and we never had him do that. I mean, I certainly would never do that. No, he was
Sure.
he was a thinker.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Speaking of other stuff, so you said you worked on the original Inspector Gadget, but you also might be one of the few people to work on the reboot. But aside from just saying like I need to find something to work on, was there anything that brought you back to that series specifically?
Oh, it was no, it was yeah, just I was just out there looking for a freelance, and I was just asked to do some storyboard work on it. That's all.
Uh huh.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was, and like I no real uh
Emotional
connection with
attachment.
yeah, like it's not like they hired me because I had worked in the first one
Oh,
and
of
they wanted
course.
ideas or something like that. It was just really just another freelance job.
Yeah,
Lots of notes, lots of revisions.
just pure
You just
happenstance.
kind of, on the other hand, it's funny because Gadget always, I always enjoyed Gadget because it had a little bit of a, I don't know, its approach. It was always a little bit, is the word meta, is that the right word?
Meta,
Something that has a
like,
little bit of a sense of self-consciousness.
I think
Uh,
so. That's one of
like there
those
was always that
words.
stuff between, like Gadget was so clueless, and then Brain was always saving his ass, and
Yeah,
and the work between them. It was sort of like the kind of things you see going on between Mickey and Donald and Goofy in some of those cartoons.
yeah. So that, like, that dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of like a thing where you kind of go, yeah, like Brain, how can you even
It's like he
stand to
supplies
be
me with
around this
something.
guy?
Yeah.
But and yet at the end of the day, what they do comes together, and they solve the dilemma or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so for that, and of course some of that comes down to script writing, I guess, but again, some of that is definitely sharpened up by ideas brought in by storyboarding, for
Oh, of
sure.
course.
And so I enjoyed that, kind of enjoyed the opportunity to do some of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's see. Thinking back, way back to, I had a question about, are there any crazy fun stories you can recall from working at Nelvana, maybe from the people that you knew
Oh
over there?
gosh.
Anything notable?
Oh, there are
It's like,
so
oh,
many.
this guy, this guy.
Oh, I don't know. Um,
Anything you can say?
yeah, like yeah, sure. Well, well, maybe that one story would be, so this business of I go that phone call and I go back to the guys and say, guys, I think I might be going to work for Lucas, and everybody just like fell over backwards, like well the word got around, this kind of thing, and unfortunately the boss at Nelvana didn't really take kindly to it. And uh, I mean, I wasn't the type who was like bragging about it or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And but just I remember there was this one moment when he was kind of going past, kind of storming past, really, because you know he was kind of could get into a mood.
Yeah.
And he said, "There are people who like quit before, and they've never worked in animation again." Like this.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
he just saw me as quitting, the show. And well, he had a point. I mean, it was his baby, and they had their hands full. There was going to be obviously an awful lot of um, work to be done, and st they needed good people, and you know, all kinds of financial. Who knows the things that he would be dealing with on a day-to-day basis,
Yeah.
and then well, so there it is. But no, I mean, but of course it didn't matter because I mean, I certainly have talked to him since, and you know,
Oh, that's
there's
good.
been no hard feelings about that, or it never really came up again, actually. But
Also good. Also good. But
yeah, 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 yeah.
speaking of working with folks, what was it like working with Steve, Steve Schneer?
Oh, with
Like any,
Steve. Well,
yeah,
let me think. I have to think because we didn't really work together. At least I should. I mean, I'm sorry if I don't remember it, Steve, but it would have been kind of those years, those sort of post Bluth years, I think,
yeah,
at Nelvana. There was Nelvana. Let me think for a moment. There was Nelvana. Nelvana had its commercials. Uh, uh, sorry, adjunct. NAC was
Mm-hmm.
still part of Nelvana at that point, and they were just in the brink of going off and creating that thing called the Animation House. That
Yeah.
was oh, shoot, Bob Fortier, yeah. And let's see, there was also kind of there was a separate division that was handling things like some other animation projects like what was it? Was RoboCop? There was the RoboCop TV show, and they did some animated segments for that, and I ended up, involved with that, storyboarding and so on. And then there was also Tales from the Crypt at
Ah,
the same
yes.
time. You remember that
Mm-hmm.
show?
Oh,
And
yeah.
that would have been the time that I probably would have talked the most to Steve.
Yeah.
And I mean, we just had fun. All I can
Yeah.
remember is just joking and joshing around, really, and then going out for beers after work and stuff like that. So,
Of course.
sorry, I wish I could come up with something.
Nah, that's fine.
Oh, here's one. Okay, I'll tell the story. I'll
Okay.
tell the story, although you probably can't put this into the final interview.
Okay.
Steve, you remember? Again, it was those years. Yeah, again, I was freelancing, and yeah, all that stuff was kind of on a freelance basis. The Tales from the Crypt, and then they did. Remember Cadillacs and Dinosaurs?
Yes, I was going to
Yeah,
say,
okay, I
well, I
worked a
haven't
fair bit
seen
on
it, but
that.
yeah, just the
Yeah,
title
yeah. I
is like,
mean,
oh,
but anyway, and and Steve was working, yeah, kind of in a producer. Uh, what's the
yeah,
word for it?
he was a
Producer
line
in
producer.
sitting in the producer seat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, at that time, and he rang me up. He said, "We've got the show that we're developing," and he gave me a whole bunch of notes about it. And I said, "Sure, okay." And so I got to work and I came up with all the stuff and I faxed it over, faxed, by the way.
I still have a
And
fax.
I got this phone call from him, and he was so mad. He says, "This is not what I asked for." Blah 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 blah. Anyway, it's kind of, and I was going, "Oh my God, oh my God," people. Anyway, so there you go. But again, and you sort of there's an initial reaction. For me, it's usually just shock, because I'm always shocked when somebody if I the times that I've had to, if I've been dressed down or, you know, said that I hadn't met the specs of the assignment or especially in sort of an angry tone.
Mm-hmm.
Just I'm just not a confrontational guy. I can't handle that kind of thing.
Mm-mm, me neither.
So and so yeah, certainly. So there's initial reaction is, oh my God, like I've 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 ruined everything.
Mm-hmm.
you know. But then of course, it goes by and then, you know, I mean, I don't think we really talked much after that. I can't quite remember. But who knows again what had happened at that point? I mean, perhaps he showed it to his boss, who like chewed him out,
Yeah.
and it was a reaction to that. So you just have to kind of go, hey, it's just that's all.
Yeah.
You can't get too bent out of shape by any of it. But it's interesting because you do get attached to these things.
Yeah.
There's going to be things where you really think you've done something where, piece of animation where you really think that character just did some beautiful acting or something like that.
Yeah.
Or, you've got, in my case, it's been often a thing where I come up with this idea in pre-production and I'll say, oh, wouldn't it be great to have kind of do this? This would plug into that. And that would be really kind of profound almost, because
Yeah.
that's what you look for, those profound moments, right?
Yeah. The ones that make you think afterwards.
Okay, okay. You want to hear a story? Okay, this
Sure.
would be
Sure.
one of my biggest. I don't think I've ever told this one.
Ooh.
So what happened to me at Pixar? I kind of wrapped off of Incredibles, and I panicked because I was told there was nothing for me. So of course I said, well, we'll see about that. So I kind of began going around to all the other productions and said, okay, here I am, I'm off of Incredibles, but I really want to stay with the studio. So I ended up on Cars for a little bit, which was they were just, beginning production on.
Yeah.
And they attached me to the storyboard department, but I mean, I think I didn't do very much in the way of storyboarding. I think it was like cleaning some stuff up, and that was about it. But there was one meeting where, they were going over a sequence, like it was a thing where everybody works for a week, and then all the boards get dragged into the conference room, and then John comes in, and everybody pitches their things, and then they kind of all duke it out, and they said, well, no, I can't remember the exact conversation here, but there was something where somebody said this, and then and that it was a beat, and I saw a moment to jump in and maybe make something known. I said, "Oh,
Yeah.
what you should do is this," and what I said was like, Miyazaki, he ends up with these beautiful golden moments, where there's a moment of stillness, in between something else, and it works well. So da 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 da, do this, and there's your Miyazaki moment, and there was the room just kind of went dead, silent, and everybody kind of looked at me for a moment, and then John says, "Okay, so now what about this thing over here?" Okay,
Well, worth a shot.
It's always worth a shot. I mean, of course, that's the thing. You see, in the movies, that's where the hero does his little pitch, and then, well, I suppose it depends on the story, but
Yeah, I was
maybe
gonna say
he gets
sometimes
crushed
they do
too
that.
at that point. But usually that's the thing which will, then, vault him to the top, right?
Yeah, where it's like fine. It's like what's the word I'm looking for?
Well,
Reverse psychology, sorta, almost in a way.
maybe. I mean,
It's like,
that's where
fine, I'll do it
again
myself.
in the cliche of it is the cigar chomping producer goes, yeah, that might just be an idea, this kind of thing, and
Yeah.
yeah, and there you go. But didn't happen in that case. Doesn't happen in real life all the time.
No. But it makes for
But
good stories.
there is a takeaway. There's a takeaway because you sort of go off and you think about it and you go, okay, well,
It's like,
next
okay,
time, maybe
different
handle that a little
approach.
bit differently. I don't know.
Yeah. Or speak to somebody else who will hear me out.
Or else you go off and you think, and you see the final film and you go, well, those guys just should have used my idea.
Yeah, I tried to warn them.
Right.
So when people say, what were they thinking? I was like, I was thinking the same thing.
Well,
I tried
yeah.
to stop them.
Oh, it's true. And at the end of the day, it's all a big laugh, right? I mean,
Yeah.
again, I think my thing has always been I've always enjoyed drawing stuff that is slightly caricatured. I mean, I'm not perhaps an outright cartoonist,
Yeah.
but although I've done plenty of that too. But again, as I said, I really enjoyed, let's say, those artists that I saw, encountered early, like those guys at Mad Magazine or Ronald Searle or Hirschfeld, or um, let's see, Rockwell. I mean, there you
Hmm.
go, top of the heap. And I mean, the way you can look at a piece of his and you laugh and you cry at the same time, you know? And that's, I think, the thing to aim for because, it's those things that, plumb the human condition, right?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
that is the stuff that, well, I mean, whether people realize that's what's going on, that's what they remember, you
Yeah,
know?
definitely. And then, yeah, maybe years later they'll figure out, like, oh, I see what they were trying to do here.
Yeah, I mean, and there's endless examples of that. I mean, successful television shows or something like that, right?
Hmm.
That we remember. Yeah, and if you trace it back, that's kind of probably what was going on in there. You know,
Yeah,
There were-
definitely.
it wasn't like just it wasn't just joke, 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 joke.
Hmm.
Uh,
There was more to it.
there was something underneath it all. Yeah,
That made it that made you remember what it is, even if
yeah,
it
yeah. I
wasn't
mean, it's
specifically. Yeah.
this is all stuff that's been discussed many, many times,
Hmm.
or put into words better than I'm putting it into now. But yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
there you are.
Let's see. Going off of that note, something completely unrelated. There was you mentioned Chuck Gammage just a while ago, and
Oh yeah.
again,
Hmm.
yeah, I was looking up Tales from the Crypt Keeper just the other day, just to look through the credits and see. I wonder if anybody else is in here that I recognize. And I saw your name, and I saw Chuck
Ah,
Gammage, and
yeah,
then
yeah.
I remember there was like cereal commercials. This is leading to cereal commercials. They have like some of the
Yes,
best
right.
animation that
Oh
you will
yes, yes.
ever
He
see
really
in
he was
anything.
very successful at all that. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, for that that there was a period there where they you know, that's what
yeah,
the I'm going to say that's what the ad agencies wanted. You know, that's that they what they
yeah.
figured
It
was the
was
best way to sell
crazy.
cereal. So, you know, and so they and there was money to be made. So, yeah.
Yeah, I
It
saw like
obviously it also propelled a lot of people. I mean, I should maybe mention I mean Chuck, Chuck's a great guy. In fact, I've been actually working with Chuck on a few things just over this last year.
really.
He's been in touch with me quite a bit. We've had a lot of talks actually. I've talked with him probably more now than I ever have recently.
Huh?
And yeah, it's no, he's a great guy. We have
Yeah.
a lot in common. But I was going to say that um oh, harking back, let's say to the 80s. I mean, again, there was that time where animation kind of got a lock on advertising as well. Uh, and you had Richard Williams over there in England and Europe, yeah, doing all his work. And that was the one thing that I wish I had done is gone over and had a chance to work with the Richard Williams studio. Because I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they were doing what I thought was some really good stuff.
Yeah.
And I know Chuck, I believe, was there. I'm not quite sure. He was at Passion Pictures for sure.
Interesting.
He was in England for a while, you know, after he worked on Roger Rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, he experienced some of those. I mean, I went to visit a couple of times, and you know, there were people there that I knew that went to see and dropped in and da da da, and uh, but it didn't actually turn into sticking around and working. But
Oh well.
anyway,
But yeah, I just had to bring up that because when I saw what
oh
was it like
yeah,
bars for the stars, those commercials with like the where they were doing like singing with the stars with Snap Crackle and Pop. I remember that specifically because there
oh
was some
that
live
yeah.
action stuff in there. One of the kids was like an actor. And I went to school with that kid at the time, so I saw him in the commercial, and then he would come back to school, and it's like, it was really weird as like when I was in the seventh grade. But yeah, I just had to bring up that story. It's just kind
Okay.
of wild. Yeah.
Well, I was yeah. Again, that was let's see, that's sort of during the post Disney time, I think.
Yeah,
When I
like
was like down there doing I just freelancing all over, and I got a few gigs with Chuck, to be like, you know,
mhm.
uh, working here, shuttling back and forth between here and downtown Toronto and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought of a thing that I might just mention. I remember like one of the
Sure.
things that was a real apotheosis or
Let's say
what's the other word for
apotheosis.
it?
Why not?
Well, apotheosis is some kind of height that you reach, isn't it?
I
Um,
think.
but it was I just remember like again way back, let's say high school, late high school, is also when I ran into uh, European comics. Like as I said, I was never a devotee particularly of American comics. They're okay, Superman, Batman, and there
Yeah.
was what else was there? I mean, and then even heavy metal when it came out.
Mhm.
Although, oh, I shouldn't actually know. I've got my chronology wrong because I didn't see heavy metal until I was in college. And but anyway, it was just that, again in high school, I suddenly found the Asterix and Obelix comics,
Mhm.
and then a lot of other stuff besides. But those were great. I mean, I just thought A, they were drawn so well, and B, they were full of all kinds of obviously really nice researched details. Like um, even though they were drawn in kind of a simplified cartoonish style, right? So the
Yeah.
Roman armor, the architecture, the whatever the costumes, and then all the different cultures that they would run into. Uh, and of course, it was all played with, just such I don't know what the word is for it. Elan, I think is, they, some of the gags were just, you know, just really, really very blithe. I mean, the the way that and I read them both in English and in French. I always enjoyed the French because it seemed to give it a bit of depth. I don't know, somehow the things they were saying seemed to be a bit deeper somehow. But it was just the
Mhm.
way that there were so many gags. There was like puns in the names,
Yeah.
and then even when they did the translations, that was being thought of. Anyway, so I really enjoyed that. And as I said, that set me off because I mean I ended up, then looking for more. And there was a wonderful bookstore in downtown Toronto for the longest time. It was called Librairie Champlain, and I don't know if it's still there. It was like over on Front and uh uh uh, uh not Jarvis. What's closer than that? Victoria or something. Is it Victoria? I kind of forgotten now.
Me
Anyway,
too.
anyway, it was a French import bookstore, and of course they had everything, but then they had this one section which was all these large format thing. I mean, a lot of the Asterix and Obelix were just simply in the library already.
Oh yeah.
That again, this is the wonderful thing about libraries in those days. And but then of course, you begin to find the other artists, of whom there are many, there are legion. And I'd say the culmination for me of that was like finding Mobius because I can't believe it. I'd
Hmm.
not seen Mobius before that point. And there's definitely a guy who is, you know, still relevant today, because A, he's just so good,
Yeah.
and B, he's just influenced so many other people down the line. So definitely, one of those artists. I feel there's certain examples of art that every artist should have on their bookshelf. Everybody should have a book of Mobius, at least one book, Mobius, and one book of Hirschfeld, and then one book of, whomever, right?
Right.
So like that, yeah. So anyway, so yeah, that was I just wanted to mention about, yeah, the European comics because those are definitely been a thing. Yeah.
Definitely. One other question, because you talked about teaching earlier as well, but I
Oh
also
yes,
wanted
yes,
to know
yes.
what are like maybe one or two what are some of the most memorable moments from your time as a teacher?
Wow. Well, let's see. I mean, I guess the thing that people would say for the most part is like, oh, that moment that you see the light bulb go on over somebody's head, like
Yeah.
that is the thing about teaching. I find is that like we're up at the front of the classroom, and I find that what tends to happen is teachers just go nuts trying to teach. They teach and they teach and they teach, but there's no learning going on.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the things you have to do, I think, is A, allow them to do it. Uh, but if as for a memorable moment in teaching, boy, oh boy, um, think for a sec. Well, actually, I would say the memorable moments in teaching perhaps happen after, like, down the line, after
Yeah.
when you're out of the classroom, maybe the person has actually graduated or gone on and they've done something, and you look and you go, ah, they got it,
Yeah.
or they did something, not that they necessarily listened to me, but because, I was only like one guy out there, and there was like all kinds of other waypoints that they would have gone past or things that they would have encountered, things that, who knows, like there's all kinds of things that are there are going to be, but
Yeah.
you look and you kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, they got it, and then of course or they get really good, and that is the thing in teaching, as has been said, that, again, a teacher has to accept is that, there's a point where, the student surpasses the master, right? And then, um, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
No,
So
especially
again,
when they're doing good.
that's
Yeah.
a staple of many stories, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
So
yeah, I'd say that part, where you sort of, and sometimes you can have a very great relationship with that person well on, like into both your lives. They can become a real
absolutely.
friend, and that's great. That's a really good moment in teaching for sure.
Definitely. Yeah. I can think of like a handful of teachers that I still keep in contact with, like from like
Hmm.
middle school, college, and yeah, they're just good friends of mine. Cause yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Now let's see. Second last question. I ask this with everybody. What is your favorite food?
I'm reminded of that bit in the Monty Python film.
What is
Uh,
your favorite color?
like that's right. You're like, what is your vest? What is your favorite color? Anyway, that's another thing actually that was bit of a lodestone for me was Monty Python. Yeah, like when Monty Python came along. Yeah, of course
Of
I
course.
really gravitated to that, like so many of us did. But anyway, what was the question again?
What is your favorite food?
What is my favorite food? Oh boy, it's hard to say. Hard to say.
Yeah.
I'd still say it would be one of my mom's hamburgers, really.
Oh.
That's a yeah, there's a real there was a state it was a all the years I was growing up. Um and my family was pretty stable. We all got
Yeah.
along. I mean, there were fights, obviously, stuff, rough patches, but anyway,
Yeah.
like I mean, there was myself, I had several brothers and sisters, and mom and dad, and it was like, pretty normal family. Mom wasn't home. Mom did go to work eventually, but dad was kind of like the guy, the breadwinner, out to work every day, 9 to 5. But yeah, Saturdays were always, again, there was many things going on, activities, summer or winter, either, you know, you're at home or whatever, summer was often a matter of, family picnics, stuff like that. Anyway, and barbecuing and so on, but hamburgers, Saturday was always the night for hamburgers. I guess it just made things easy, because mom knew what to do.
Yeah.
But I don't know, something about those hamburgers, they always taste really good,
I get that.
and I've got the recipe, and they taste pretty good, but they're not quite as good,
Yeah.
They don't,
I get
don't,
that.
I
Yeah.
don't never seem to quite match the memory of the hamburgers that we had,
Yeah. Maybe she
you
put
know,
something in there that she didn't tell you.
something like that. Yeah, yeah. So that's a favorite food. But I don't know. Um, just about anything. I mean,
Hmm.
I can certainly remember times when I discovered new food, like Asian food. Again, I growing up in this town at the time I did, there was like very little in the way of like international cuisine. And we didn't go out much or anything like that.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, like going out to a restaurant was really unusual. And so then, yeah, in later years, discovering, different cuisines has always been kind of fun. Asian cuisine, I certainly enjoy. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm always up for a nice, like noodle bowl, ramen, which is really something you can't get here, but I've tried making it.
All I do
So
is
yeah.
instant ramen. That's the closest I'll get to it
Oh
for a bit.
no. Oh, you can do better than that. Yeah.
I can, but it
I'm
tastes
sure
good to me.
there's got to be an international market nearby you
Oh,
where you
definitely.
get all kinds
Yeah.
of stuff.
I'm just kind
Yeah, I
of
mean that's the
lazy.
wonderful thing about today is that stuff is available.
Yeah.
Uh,
One of the pros.
but I don't know. Chocolate chip cookies maybe. I don't know. That's another one of my favorite foods.
That's a winner.
Oh yeah.
So
There you
let's
go.
see. Yeah, I'm glad I know that. Let's
Nothing
see.
healthy, of course.
No, no, that's okay. I didn't say what's your favorite healthy food.
Yeah.
It can be as unhealthy as you want. That's okay. But any final questions for me? I know you already asked me
Oh,
a couple of things earlier, but
well,
is there
that's a
anything
good
else?
idea. Let's see. I was gonna say, like, can I ask maybe, like, what do you think of the state of the art of, okay, I'll just say animation, but
Okay.
let's say even something like storytelling these days. I mean, I'm not sure how wide ranging your interests are or uh, what kind of things you follow, but yeah, where do you figure we're at in terms of like, just good stuff when it comes to stories?
Hmm. Okay, that's a very interesting
I know it's
question.
a little bit of a, yeah, it's a
No,
bit
no,
of a
I
big
I could
question, but
probably answer that for you though.
I
Like
mean, what's some good books you've been reading or something like that?
so let's see.
Or,
So let's see. In terms of books, well, I've been really just reading a lot of art books mainly, but
oh, here you go.
in terms of like when it comes to cuz my tastes in like animation and movie telling, I would say it's all over the place. Like I'll watch something that came out like last week and then something that
Oh
came out
yeah,
like 30, 40 years ago, and I will be
right.
inspired by what the thing in the 80s did versus what this thing that just came out
Yeah,
in
that's
like
interesting. Yeah.
2022 did. And I feel like there is always good storytelling in a lot of places. In terms of like how people get to tell it, I feel like well, there's always been like stipulations and different like restrictions, like when it comes to even just various animation coming out right now, where you'll see so many shows that get like the legs swept under them, and it's like we had so many more stories to tell. I wish
Oh
we could
well,
tell more
yes. Well,
stories. And
and then they're sort of at the mercy of the market there.
yeah,
Yeah.
the mercy of
Yeah.
like big business and things like that. But it's like, oh man, I really would have liked to have seen this continue or things like that. But I feel like there's good stories everywhere, and I feel like there just needs to be more. I want more opportunities for people to tell those stories like in full and
Hmm.
do their own thing. But that's been a thing that's been going on forever, I
I would
feel.
say, like again, just okay. The first thing that I thought of when you said that, just books on art, you said books on art. I immediately thought of a couple which people don't often cite. But I was going to say overall, yeah, I sort of tend to want to know like things in story, which yeah, I tend to default a little bit to maybe classic stuff. Like there, partly because there's just so many books that I haven't read yet, you know. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, which I should have read by now. I'm thinking of, Dickens, for example, a lot of the Charles Dickens books or
Yeah.
um, literature, quite honestly, that does attract me. But I mean, there's lots of modern stories that are quite good. I was going to say, here's one I don't know if a lot of people talk about. It's called Dear Theo. Um, so Van Gogh, like, we always think of Van Gogh as this like solitary guy who's like, kind of hashing out the art, all by himself and going through a lot of trauma. And but he wrote letters to his brother constantly, and those letters are all in a book. There's a book out there, and it's quite easy to get a hold of, and
Mm-hmm.
it's called Dear Theo because his that was his brother's name,
Yeah.
and he basically gives kind of a running commentary of his entire art career, and it talks all about, he's talking about all the stuff he's thinking, and then other things he'll say, oh, I managed to get this tube of paint, today from this dealer, and what's better than the stuff I had before, that kind of thing. It's really, really good. Yeah, so
Interesting.
I mean
Yeah.
stuff like that. That's not a story per se. I mean, I know I started talking about stories, but yeah, I'm just saying that's an art book you might want to check out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've written it down.
A little different than looking at the person's art.
Yeah. I tend to look at art books and I just like, why am I not doing something like this right now?
Hmm.
Where it's like, I want to,
Hmm.
it makes me want to do my own thing.
Right. Yeah, well, there you go. And that's, I mean, there's a thing. Is that there's so many distractions these days.
Oh, yeah.
Like we have particularly, of course, social media. You're trying to keep up with that, and
Hmm.
it's just so hard because to get anything done of my own because I'm constantly trying to check in and see what other people are doing. And then
Yeah.
I see so much great stuff out there too. I find that that's it shouldn't be, but it's a bit daunting
I
because
know. Yeah.
have an idea, for something and a story, let's say, and then you go on social media, somebody's already got you know, a
Yeah.
pitch or there's a series or the graphic novel, and they're already doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Someone does like
darn.
this really great piece of art that looks like something I could never ever do. And it's like, oh, I just did this in 5 minutes. And it's like,
Yeah,
oh,
well, I mean, that's what they
that freaks me
say.
out.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. So I just
it
sketched
probably
this when
wasn't,
I was
it was
bored.
probably done, probably took more time than that. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. I do find that, some of the digital techniques these days kind of allow people to kind of like you can do a lot without
Mm-hmm.
really having to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm just thinking of all the, kind of the photo bashing that goes on in Photoshop and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where you make a brush out of something and just go, it's done.
I'm
And
guilty of doing that sometimes.
well, but we are. I mean, because yeah, I mean, what happens is that you have a situation where if you are especially working, in a commercial situation, it's business, and they're all about getting the job done quickly.
Quickly.
And one of the
Yeah.
things, yeah, that actually very close to my experience. The default now with many studios to create if you're designing a location is for to get somebody to make a quick digital, sometimes not even so quick, a digital model of it, and then of course then get somebody to draw over it.
Hmm.
which is actually, that's legitimate to an
Yeah, that's
extent.
kind of cool.
Except that I would say to any artist who's doing that, make sure you also do some work of your own, which is doing it from scratch. So
Yeah.
you've got some balance there, because those basic skills, like perspective or proportion, or I mean, like, because really, let's face it, when you're kind of drawing off of the digital models, like a lot of the work's already done.
Right.
You're just kind of doing a cleanup. I mean, you can add details, but you're
Hmm.
not thinking in terms so much of anyway. I mean, you know, but now where was I going with that? Because I got away from my point, but anyway, it doesn't
That's
matter.
okay.
But that's interesting because that again is a oh, just saying that, yeah, the studios of course want something done fast, as fast as they can do, because it's a money concern, and
Yeah.
so they will, pick up on production processes that save money and time. So
Hmm.
and yeah, marvelous things are being done. There's no doubt about it.
Definitely. Well, I think that's all the let me see. I think that's we've got everything
Okay,
we got
okay.
all the questions knocked out, but is there anything that you would want to plug or anything that you're up to
Yeah.
right now that you want people to know about?
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm always a little bit wary of doing that because I
Understandable.
have some things that, yeah, I have done some work on which I would consider to be sort of like, oh yeah, this could be a great little project. But then you sort of talk to somebody about it and it just doesn't seem to come across. It's almost like you kind of have to do it and then present it.
Yeah.
Um, but no, no, I don't know. I do have I definitely have two or three or four ideas in mind, which, could turn into simply, yeah, like a short film or, um, uh, I see it as being small scale, honestly,
Yeah.
but, which would more than likely involve some, well, I'd like it to involve action. I mean, I love movies. I've never been like wild. I mean, I'm not, I mean, I like them, but it's not like I've ever felt the urge to do like a graphic novel. I'd rather do a short film.
Yeah.
There's just something about the film, medium that I think is quite exciting. But anyway, but specifically, I couldn't talk about anything specific. It's all just something to do with like, uh, knights in armor. I'll tell you one thing. I mean, again, I keep mentioning the classics. I mean, I'm a devotee of, you know, literature like Shakespeare. I think, wouldn't it be great if somebody could mount a production of a Shakespeare play? I mean, if you could get an animation project off the ground
Yeah.
that was one of Shakespeare's plays. I mean, you might have to adapt it greatly, which they all do. A lot of the stage plays,
Yeah.
definitely, or stage productions, they'll say. But I mean, I think there's some of the best storytelling in the world has been
Hmm.
done in that body of work. I love all that stuff. So anyway,
Hmm.
so there are things I would like to see um, done, but yeah, I mean, what do you do? I guess you have to come up with a little pitch package and take it somewhere.
I guess so. That's what they tell me.
Yeah, that's what they tell me too. So I guess that's what I got to do.
Well, I wish you luck
All
on
right.
that.
Well, thank
But
you, thank you, thank you for reaching out and wanting to hear some of the stuff that I've encountered and has gone on. And I mean, this is important because this is sort of like it's history being recorded, right? I mean,
yeah,
like
history being
every
told.
time, every time somebody gets recorded talking a little bit about their career,
A
another
little
little
piece of
piece of the
history comes
puzzle
out.
gets, yeah, another little piece of history gets filled in.
That's my goal
And
with this.
that is important because there are so many stories out there that need to be told,
Yeah,
about
especially
all the
when
stuff that has gone on over the years.
yeah, especially from people who may not get as much of a spotlight as some of like the higher ups or anything like
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah. I mean,
So that's a yeah.
I love to think about all the people who had all the little, I won't say, you know, not the dirty jobs. That's not the right word for it. But let's say at the height of the um uh, studio days at Disney, let's say 30s, 40s, 50s, you know, there's just tons of people who did stuff. Actually, if you want to read a really good book,
Mm-hmm.
go get. It's the one on Dennis the Menace by Hank Ketchum. It's called Inside the Menace. I just Google it, you'll find the title.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
because he worked for Disney for a while.
Mm-hmm.
He was an in-betweener or assistant animator or something for a while there in the 40s, 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, as were a lot of people that went off and then did their own thing. Walt Kelly, who did Pogo, he was there too. Um, uh, but Ketchum has this book that is dynamite. A, because it fills in a lot of these little nuggets of history, kind of talking about his own career path, and then some of the things he mentions about. He talks a little bit about, the people he worked with at Disney and so on. But the other thing he does, there's this little insert in the middle of the book where he kind of does this little breakdown of Dennis the Menace, and he goes through every one of the characters and kind of tells you what they're all about.
Yeah.
It's pure gold.
Huh.
Yeah, I mean, every story person should read that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Um, anyway, yes, just reinforcing as you say, there's like, oh, it must have been a blast. Like what
Mm-hmm.
was the cafeteria like? What was the,
Yeah.
you
So
know,
what
what
did
was it
these
like
guys get up to?
what was it like to have to stay all night and slave away on something that got cut out the next morning?
I
I mean,
know. Yeah.
we have had some stories about that, but yeah.
And to all you folks listening at home, I just want to say thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on another episode of Up North Impersonal, whenever that may be. See ya!